Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. For the second time in as many days, Harry awoke with a comfortable weight settled over him, shifting as carefully as he could, so not to disturb the still sleeping metamorph. He slid from underneath her and pulled on his exercise clothing. "So that's how it is," the sleepy voice of Tonks teased. "I never took you for the type to get what you want and then leave without even a goodbye." "Sorry?" Harry mumbled. "I didn't want to disturb you." Tonks raised a brow as she stared at him through her heavy-lidded eyes. "It's fine," she huffed mockingly. "Just leave poor me here in the cold whilst you go gallivanting off." Harry chuckled. "Oh, you're so hard done by," he sighed as he shook his head. "What about if I promise to come back tonight?" he asked, hopefully. Tonks pretended to think it over before nodding. "It will do, but you have a lot of making up to do," she warned. "How dare you just leave me here?" Harry smirked and kissed her softly. "I'll miss you," he whispered. "Me too," she returned with a smile. "Now get out, you've disturbed my sleep enough," she grumbled as she turned away from him. Harry muttered under his breath as he exited and made his way to the 7th-floor corridor, where he was due to meet Leo and Charlie. He arrived to find the former awake and alert, as was his way. Years of regimented schooling had taken its toll on him, and even after having graduated months ago, he was still a very early riser, unless he'd been drinking. "Morning," Leo greeted him chirpily. "Sleep well?" The look of amusement and lilt in his tone caused Harry to narrow his eyes at the boy. He must have tried to wake him before making his way here, only to find his bed empty. It was the only reason that he would be wearing that idiotic grin. "Shut up," Harry growled. "I'm not judging," Leo insisted, holding his hands up innocently. "You were noticeably absent from your room, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out where you were." "Thankfully for you," Harry retorted. Leo clutched his chest dramatically. "Oh, that was very unkind," he sighed. Harry shook his head as a portrait of a rather voluptuous woman opened and revealed a barely awake Charlie, who stumbled out of the hole. "Morning, little Potter," Leo greeted him loudly as he slapped him smartly on the back. Charlie groaned. "Does he have to be so loud?" he whined. Harry snorted. "You'll be wishing he was so cheery soon enough," he laughed. "Aye," Leo agreed. "Now it's time to get moving." "On the double," he commanded, as he began jogging down the corridor. "How the bloody hell does he have so much energy?" "He's worse than Fred and George," Charlie complained as he followed the departing boy. "Stop whinging," Leo called back. "I could always put some gravel in your shoes," he offered. "That will give you something to moan about." Charlie grimaced at the thought and kept his mouth shut. He had a feeling that he was not going to enjoy this as much as he first thought. An hour later, a breathless, hunched-over Charlie fought to regain his breath as his chest burned and head swam from the arduous run he had endured. He glared balefully at the two other boys, neither even having appeared to break a sweat as they stretched and chatted away amiably whilst he struggled to even breathe without feeling as though his lungs were on fire. "Not bad," Leo praised. "It will get easier the more you do it." "Up yours," Charlie bit back breathlessly, eliciting a laugh from the others. "I will let that one slide," Leo replied with a slight frown. "Any more lip from you, lad, and I will show you how respect and discipline was taught to me." Charlie flinched and nodded apologetically. "Good. Now come along," Leo urged. "You belong to me for another 2 hours yet." Charlie sighed as he followed the pair into an abandoned classroom on the 3rd floor and stood as straight as he could whilst waiting for the next part of his training to begin. "We will be working on some magic, but for the most part we will be teaching you how to survive without it," Leo explained. "Get your shield out," he instructed. Charlie removed the coppery bangle from his wrist and enlarged it into the circular construct. It was not as large as he expected, but was weighty and thick. "You will learn to do that quicker," Leo insisted. "You need to have that up as though it was your pecker on a promise." Charlie flushed as he nodded. "It's heavy," he complained. "So get used to it on both arms until it feels like it is a part of you," Leo advised. "For you it could the most important thing you own. So take care of it." "So, how do I use it?" Charlie asked, feeling foolish as soon as the words left his mouth. It's bloody useful, lad, Leo explained, but it has its limits, so pay attention, he said firmly. First thing is that it is useless against the unforgivables. The nature of the magic will rip through that like it wasn't there. It's technically a magical shield as it has been enchanted. It is the magic that protects and holds it together, but certain magic will affect it. Equally, a powerful enough blasting curse will destroy it, so that is why we will make you as agile as a cat. You should always dodge if you can, and use the shield only if you can't. Charlie frowned, but nodded his understanding. So, what can it defend against? He asked. Most things, Leo answered as he scratched his chin. Just avoid the unforgivables and anything that damages a wide area, he instructed. It will eventually fail if it is used too much and not given sufficient time to recharge. Okay, Charlie replied. It would certainly be worth learning to use if it could defend him against any kind of attack without him having to deplete his limited reserves. Pass it to Harry and we will give you a quick demonstration before we start teaching you how to use it correctly, Leo commanded. Charlie handed the shield to his brother and stepped back as the two faced off. Leo drew his wand and waited for Harry to give him a nod. With a speed and ferocity he did not expect, Leo unleashed a barrage of curses he had never seen nor heard of, and it did not help that he did not utter a single word. Harry, seemingly undeterred by the attack, began dodging and blocking as though the colorful spells were nothing more than a tickling hex. Charlie had his doubts. The dull thud they emitted when they rung against the shield was enough to force him to cover his ears, and if that wasn't enough, the deep cuts and scorch marks in the walls and floor left him feeling nervous for the safety of his brother. As you can see, Leo spoke, his casting continuing as seamlessly as ever. When the shield is held stationary, it will absorb the spell, but you can also use it to deflect, he explained as Harry demonstrated, sending the spell back towards Leo, who simply turned his head slightly to avoid it. Any questions? He asked. Charlie shook his head, his awe at the two leaving him lost for words. Good, Leo replied. We will start simple and build you up, and when we feel that you are making enough progress, we will teach you to fight back without even having to raise your wand. I hope you're ready, little Potter. The next months are going to be the hardest of your life. Charlie audibly gulped as Harry handed him back the shield and gave him a nod of encouragement. Within what seemed only a blink of an eye, the moon had both waned and waxed, and January gave way to February and the fast-approaching second task. Harry could not be prouder of the dedication that his little brother was showing towards his training, despite how difficult he knew it was for the boy. Leo had high expectations, and Charlie did all he could to reach them. He had struggled throughout the first few weeks as expected, but when he had grown accustomed to the work, he began to show great improvement. His stamina from being pushed through several runs a week, coupled with the strenuous workouts he was put through, and his constant practice with the shield was paying dividends. In the past week they had begun teaching him hand-to-hand combat, and though he was not particularly gifted in the art, his dedication and motivation would see him make the necessary strides. The boy had left battered and bruised after each session, but never missed the next day, something that even Leo would praise, though not openly in front of their student. He was pleased with the progress, but the training of his brother was not at the forefront of his mind. His focus was solely on the upcoming second task of the tournament. He was as ready as he could be. His plan had been long since formulated, and though it was rather simplistic, his approach would certainly be remembered, though he was still not comfortable that the judges intended on having live hostages. Over the past weeks he had scoured the lake and had even located the Mermish village within its depths, but he couldn't help but think that so many things could go wrong. The creatures within the lake could pose a problem if one was not vigilant, but they were mostly pests in comparison to what he had faced. Something just felt off. He had voiced his concerns to everyone and insisted they remain alert during the lead-up to the task, to the point that he had even accosted James Potter in the corridor to ensure he kept Charlie close by in the days leading up to the task. Tonks, too, had been warned, though she had been rather flippant in her response, as he had expected. She was certainly not one to be coddled, and she had no problem showing him that. He shook his head of his thoughts as he focused on the breakfast he had no appetite for. He had remained in his own rooms last night as Tonks had been called in for a meeting with the rest of the Oro department to discuss security for the day, and thus he had not slept well. He had become too used to her bed and her form pressed up against him. "Are you ready for today?" Sirius asked as he took a seat opposite and helped himself to some porridge. Harry nodded. "Something doesn't feel right," he mumbled. "We are all here and safe," Sirius reminded him. "I know, I just have a feeling that something is going to happen," Harry sighed. "Just focus on the task," Sirius advised. "We will keep watch on everything else." "Aye," Leo yawned as he entered the room from his own. "If anything goes wrong, send us a signal and we will be right there," he assured his friend. Harry nodded gratefully, though the feeling continued to weigh heavily. With the time of the task drawing nearer, he mentally repeated his plan as he took stock of everything he would need, his wand most of all. He had already put on his black swimming shorts below his clothes, affixed 2 enchanted blades to his legs, and even a disillusioned pouch full of potions around his neck. His air ring had multiple tracking charms imbued into it, and it also served as an emergency portkey that would take him directly to as close to his grandfather as any wards would allow. He was as prepared as he could be, but still the feeling of something inevitably going amiss remained. With his final checks completed, he gave Sirius a nod, and with Leo, Aunt Cassie and Arcturus in tow, they left their quarters and made their way towards the lake where the stands were already full of spectators, and the other 3 champions had been assembled on a pontoon a distance away from the shore. "Remember, signal if anything goes wrong," Leo reminded him as he was pulled into a tight embrace by the boy. "I will," Harry assured him. "Good luck, Harry," Cassie whispered as she followed suit. "Hold nothing back and do whatever is necessary to come out of there," Arcturus advised. "Show them all the kind of Lord Black you are." "I will," Harry replied firmly. Sirius by now had paled almost as much as he had at the prospect of his son facing a dragon. He gripped his shoulder tightly, his hand trembling. "The first sign of trouble, you get out of there," he almost pleaded. Harry gave him a smile as he shook his head. "You know I don't have it in me to quit," he returned with a shrug. "I'm a black, Dad. We always persevere." Sirius snorted humorlessly and gave his son a hug. "You make us all proud every day, Harry," he croaked. Harry shook his head as he turned and made his way towards the lake of. Stripping off, he ignored the catcalls and whistles coming from the assembled crowd and the following flashes of cameras being used. Without looking back, he cast a warming charm and waded into the lake. Even through the charm, the chill of the water reached, though he could not be sure if it was indeed the water or the grave expressions of the other champions as he approached. "Ah, excellent," Bagman declared as Harry pulled himself atop the wooden platform. "Now that Mr. Black is here, we can begin the briefing," he announced, the other judges seemingly content to let the man take the lead. He coughed to clear his throat before continuing, his brow perspiring as he looked upon the very unhappy champions before him. "Your task is simple. Each of you have a hostage in the lake, and the only thing you have to do is retrieve them within the 1-hour allotted time limit," he explained, the mood of the champions unchanging. "Mr. Crumb will rescue Miss Granger. Mr. Diggory, Miss Chang awaits you," he added, turning his attention to the Hogwarts representative. "Miss Delacour, your younger sister." Fleur let out a choked sob. "And Mr. Black, Miss Tonks?" His next words were cut off as Harry seized the man tightly around the throat and pointed his wand between his eyes, his own an emerald inferno boring into the now fearful cerulean. The teen paid no heed to the other judges as they drew their own and aimed them towards him. "You had no right," Harry hissed furiously. "She volunteered, Mr. Black," Dumbledore thundered, his usual calmness all but absent, his wand leveled and ready to use. "Go ahead, Dumbledore," Harry spat. "Show everyone the man you really are." With a growl, he shoved Bagman off the pontoon, his focus solely on the Hogwarts headmaster. "I didn't think so," he snarled as the old man replaced his wand up his sleeve. "If I find out that she was forced into this or if she is harmed in any way, I will fucking gut every last one of you," he vowed. "Now start the task." "The announcements can wait until the task has started," Dumbledore conceded. "We will be discussing your conduct, Harry," he assured the boy. Harry simply sneered at the man and ground his teeth in preparation, all plans he had made completely forgotten. He wanted her out of the water as soon as possible, and he knew just the way to do it. "The task will begin at the sound of the klaxon," Dumbledore announced, his voice having been amplified in the interim. The very second the signal sounded, Harry cast a featherlight charm on himself and propelled himself forward and into the air with a series of banishing charms, leaving a stunned crowd in his wake. To most it would appear that he was flying. It was as close as one could come without a broom beneath them. The magic itself was simple, but it had taken him a lot of practice to perfect and many close calls, though now his efforts were not in vain. In a matter of moments he dropped the spell and plummeted into the icy water below. It wasn't until he had descended a considerable distance that he remembered to apply a bubblehead charm, not the most enduring method for breathing underwater, but it would have to suffice. He had neither the patience nor time for anything else. Making his way further into the murky depths that were now familiar, he knew that he was close to the village. His senses were on high alert for any creatures that could pose a problem to his progress, though everything was eerily quiet. Even as the dwelling came into view, there was no sign of anything. It was as though the mere people had simply vanished. His thoughts quickly shifted as he spotted 4 figures lashed to a large statue, each unmoving, bobbing slightly with the current. Without wasting a moment, he approached them, still acutely aware of the heavy feeling in his stomach. As Bagman had explained, Hermione, Chang and the younger Delacour were there along with Tonks, and he knew immediately something was wrong. They were all considerably paler in the dim waters, but Tonks was deathly white. His heart sunk as he reached her and noticed an almost black fluid trickling from her nose and mouth. Desperately, so not to wound her further, he drew one of his knives and began hacking at her bindings, only to be halted by a sudden firm grip on his wrist. He turned to find himself face to face with a merman, his eyes panicked as he began gesturing frantically. Harry knew not what the creature was trying to say, and was about to proceed in his efforts to free the metamorph, when the being started shaking him with one hand and pointing over his shoulder with the other. For a moment he believed that it was the rest of the champions arriving to secure their own hostage. Those notions disappeared when he counted at least a score of figures approaching with wands drawn. Quickly he resumed his work and managed to cut away most of the ropes before he felt a searing pain erupt across his shoulders. With a hiss of pain, he retaliated with a severing curse that almost cleaved one of the attackers in two, a crimson stream of blood leaking from the now exposed guts of the man. Undeterred, the others pressed forward and began firing a myriad of spells at him, and he was forced to shield both himself and the hostages. Gritting his teeth, he dropped it in a sudden lull and fired back with a plethora of his own curses, several men and women becoming limp as they impacted against them. The odds, however, were not in his favor. Another spell clipped his side and another wave of pain washed over him, but it only served to anger him further. He cared not for why they were attacking him. His thoughts remained with the woman now precariously tied to the statue, the unsightly liquid still oozing from her. A flurry of movement from the corner of his eye revealed a swarm of mere people, many of whom were sporting fresh injuries of their own from a previous skirmish. Their tridents and shields were drawn and they fell upon the attackers, giving Harry a much-needed reprieve. One of the creatures stopped and began pointing to him and then at the surface, to which Harry nodded gratefully. He had Tonks free only a moment later, and he pushed hard off the bottom of the lake with her firmly in his arms as he fired an overpowered concussion jinx and a cascade of boiling water in the midst of the witches and wizards, before he used his wand to propel them towards the surface and their escape. Leo, along with the rest of the blacks, situated themselves in the stands reserved for the family of the competing students, and was soon after joined by Katie, who took a seat next to him. "How is he?" she questioned. "Oh shit," Leo gasped as he witnessed Harry seizing Bagman by the throat, the rest of the crowd whispering amongst themselves about the display. "Get down there," Arcturus instructed him as the man was shoved into the lake as Harry turned his apparent ire towards Dumbledore. With a nod, he vaulted over the barricade and reached the group as Harry took off into the sky above. "What the hell happened?" he questioned the judges. Dumbledore sighed as he shook his head. Mr. Black has taken issue with the hostage that was selected for him to rescue, the old man explained. Knowing that only one person was absent that would cause such a reaction from his friend, Leo snorted irritably. You put Tonks in the lake? He questioned, his own hand twitching towards his wand. With her permission, Crouch interjected. Leo shook his head and chuckled ruefully. You had better hope for your sakes that is the truth, he warned before turning his attention to the currently peaceful lake lapping at the shore, the words of the headmaster to the crowd, nothing but white noise in his ears. Harry would be furious when he emerged from there, though he felt no pity for who would be on the receiving end of it. It was deserved as far as he was concerned. What's going on? The voice of Sirius broke him from his thoughts. Tonks is in there, Leo replied shortly as he pointed to the body of water. Bastards, Sirius hissed angrily as he glared in the direction of the judges. Harry will get her out, Arcturus placated as he joined them. If he doesn't, then I would not want to be in their shoes. Leo nodded as Katie threaded her arm through his own and joined him in his vigil, watching for any sign that anything was amiss. What could only have been a few minutes later, the surface broke and a mass of silver hair could be seen as the French champion approached, her usually immaculate tresses partly stained a coppery red. Even before she reached them, she began shouting hysterically in her native language as she clutched her wound and waded towards them. What's happening? Leo asked a very pale Madame Maxime, who was attempting to calm the distraught girl. She says there are lots of people in there who shouldn't be. They attacked her, the large woman explained. Without hesitation, Leo began stripping off his clothes until he was left in only his underwear and flicked his wand in his hand. Monsieur, monsieur, the Delacour girl pleaded with him as she dug her nails sharply into his arm. Leo nodded in understanding as he turned to Sirius, who too had stripped off. Let's go, he commanded, before he plunged himself into the frigid lake, followed by both Sirius and Dumbledore a moment later. He forced himself deeper and further into the abyss, looking for any sign of life or anything that could show him where he needed to be. He felt a gentle tap on his shoulder and was greeted by the grave visage of the Hogwarts headmaster, who pointed slightly to their right. He gave the man a stiff nod and headed in that direction, his eyes slowly adjusting to the lack of light. After what seemed like an eternity, he saw the unmistakable signs of spellfire ahead and pushed himself harder to reach it. What he came upon was the Hogwarts and Durmstrang champion attempting to fend off a group of wizards and witches that seemed determined to prevent them proceeding any closer to the village a short distance away, in which another battle seemed to be taking place between the mere people and another host of invaders. He felt another, more frantic tapping on his shoulder and turned to find Sirius gesturing between himself and the headmaster, indicating that the two of them would assist the champions. Understanding that he had been tasked with aiding the mere people, he shot off in the direction of the village and engaged the smaller group there. 3 fell to his wand before they knew he was there, and 2 more followed before any had the chance to respond. To their own detriment, the remaining half-dozen or so turned their attention to him, only for the mere people to seize the advantage and impale them with their tridents. Seeing that Sirius and Dumbledore had their situation under control also, he held up his hands in what he hoped was a peaceful manner towards the mere people before pointing to the hostages, and then in an upwards direction. A large male, perhaps their leader, nodded and followed him towards the statue. Seeing that only 3 were there, Leo held up 4 fingers questioningly and the creature pointed towards the surface. He sighed in relief as he began untying the diminutive blonde girl from the post, only to be interrupted by the arrival of a Patronus in the form of a hydra. They all have to die. Kill all the attackers, the desperate voice of Harry instructed. Knowing that his friend would not give such an order without good reason and the uncharacteristically frantic nature of his tone, he hurried towards Dumbledore and Sirius, who had now managed to either subdue or kill the people they had been battling with. The latter was the first to notice his approach, and Leo pointed at the 2 men and 1 woman that had survived and drew a finger across his own throat to signal his intentions. Sirius frowned at him, so Leo fired his own Patronus to explain, before carrying out his instructions and sending a series of severing curses at the trio. The headmaster turned towards him furiously, and Leo shook his head in response. The man only calmed when Sirius stood in front of him and did the same. motioning for the man to go back to land. With his grisly job done, the younger of the three headed back to the statue where the other two hostages had already been liberated and pulled the little girl into his arms before beginning his own return journey, hoping that none of his efforts had been for naught. He was not averse to killing if it was necessary, but it was not and never would be something he would revel in. Thankfully, Harry and Tonks emerged not too far away from the shore, as he was loath to expose her to any more magic in her current state, which only worsened the moment whatever charm she had been under to breath underwater fell. She began to convulse in his arms, and it took all of his strength to hold her as he kicked his legs until he felt the water was shallow enough to continue on foot. "Help her!" he shouted as he carried her from the lake and laid her as gently as he could on the floor. Arcturus and Cassiopeia were the first to reach them, followed shortly by Madame Pomfrey, who sprung into action immediately and began casting diagnosis charms. All the while, Harry clung to one of her hands at a loss with what to do, willing the woman to just hold on. "I don't know what is wrong," Pomfrey declared worriedly. "It's a curse of some sort, but nothing I have ever seen before." Cassiopeia shoved the woman aside and took her place, muttering under her breath as she ran her wand along the still twitching form of the metamorph. "Come on, Dora, please," Harry whispered, his grip on her hand tightening. "I've got it," Aunt Cassie exclaimed triumphantly, though her expression was grim. "She has had a very obscure binding curse placed on her. It was something that former slave masters used to bind the life force of their slaves to them," she explained. "It drains the magic from the slave and feeds it directly to the master." "How do we break it?" Harry questioned desperately. "The master is the only one that can break it unless they or the victim is killed," Cassie sighed apologetically. Harry shook his head in denial. "You must be able to do something," he said hotly. As he spoke, the convulsions worsened. The young woman was now moaning inaudibly as the blackened fluid slowly began to stem. Soon after, the form she had adopted for the day morphed into the woman that Harry shared a bed with, the one she reserved only for him. "Her magic is fading," Cassie groaned. "If we can slow that down, I may be able to locate the master," she mused aloud. "Do what you have to," Arcturus instructed. "Harry, you need to calm down and gently push your magic into her. Can you do that?" Harry nodded through the tears that had formed and took a deep breath before doing as he was bid. Immediately, the black fluid began oozing once again, but Harry continued his efforts, muttering under his breath words of encouragement that were falling on deaf ears. "They're in the lake?" The voice of his aunt disrupted him. He looked between the woman in his arms and the water, torn between what he should do. "Leo and Sirius are both in there," Arcturus informed him. "You need to keep doing what you're doing." Harry nodded, sent off a hurried Patronanus, and internally pleaded that this would not be the one time his friend would let him down. After a few minutes, though it could have been an hour, the girl inhaled deeply as her eyes fluttered open before she fell limp. Harry swallowed deeply as he cupped her cheek with his free hand and choked back a sob of relief. As he felt her shallow breathing, he pulled her to him tightly and buried his head in her neck, uncaring that everyone could see him. He was too relieved to be angry, but he knew that would come the moment he knew that she would be okay. "Come on, Harry," Cassie encouraged gently. "Let the healer do her job." Harry nodded as he released Tonks to Madame Pomfrey's care, his eyes not straying from the girl he had almost lost. He was pulled from his reverie by the sound of raised voices and turned to witness a heated exchange between Sirius and Dumbledore, who were emerging from the lake, with Diggory and Crumb not far behind with their hostages. "We had them bound, Sirius," Dumbledore seethed. "What he did was unnecessary." Sirius shook his head, but his reply was cut off by the shouting of the French champion in her mother tongue. The girl fought ferociously against her headmistress, who was attempting to prevent her from jumping back in the water. The reasons for her action became clear as Leo approached with a small girl wrapped around his upper body, neither seeming to be worse for wear physically. He gave Harry a single grim nod as he passed, only to be intercepted by the furious Hogwarts headmaster. "You will explain your actions, young man?" he demanded. Leo shook his head as he returned the glare of the old mage, adjusting the now cowering girl in his arms so that she was sat more comfortably. "You think I enjoyed what happened down there?" he hissed angrily. I told him to do it, Harry broke in, because of your stupidity in using live hostages. Her life was in danger, he spat as he pointed at the unconscious metamorph. Had he not killed the people that attacked us, then it would be her dead, and that would be on all of your hands. Dumbledore frowned in confusion, and Harry held up a hand to silence any rebuke. It was an ancient binding curse, Cassiopeia interjected. The person she was bound to was in the lake. They had to die so that the curse could be broken, and we had no time for your morals. Dumbledore? The man sagged defeatedly. They attacked us, and they paid the price. Harry ground out. Had they not? Then it would have been innocent blood on our hands rather than that of our enemy. Dumbledore shook his head. A thorough investigation will have to take place as to how this occurred, he muttered. For now we will suspend the scoring until we have concluded what happened here, he added before walking towards the other judges. Harry shook his head darkly and shared a look with his grandfather. We will be having a family meeting as soon as you are available, Arcturus announced. Stay with her, Harry. She is a target now just as much as you. Harry nodded and followed Madame Pomfrey as she levitated a less pallid Tonks towards the school. You go with him, Sirius. Leo sighed. I'll deal with everything here and let you know what happens. Sirius nodded gratefully as he followed his son and cousin. You did well, Leo, Arcturus praised. Cassiopeia nodded her agreement as Leo shook his head. I did what was necessary, he sighed as he turned his attention towards the impatiently waiting French champion, and another woman who could only be her mother. She's okay, he assured the worrying pair. A little shaken up, but she will be fine. Thank you, Fleur whispered as she pried her sister from his arms. Oui, her mother added. I cannot repay you for what you have done for us today. Leo shook his head. She's an innocent girl. She had no business being there, he sighed. Oui, Madame Maxime will be certainly receiving a visit from my husband, Mrs. Delacour vowed as she checked on the state of her youngest. Leo smiled slightly as he left them, only to feel the wind being knocked out of him by a worried Katie as she wrapped her arms around him. I'm okay, he assured her as he returned the gesture. I just need a little time alone. Katie nodded and gave him a chaste kiss and smile before she joined her friends and the rest of the crowd that were already heading back towards the castle. He himself avoided the throngs of people and retrieved his clothing from the edge of the lake where they had been left. He dressed himself and walked towards the forest, his intention to seek solace in the one constant he'd had over the years. Despite the reasoning behind it, taking a life never sat well with him. He would be okay eventually, this he knew. Now, however, he wanted the company of his faithful companion, some time away from everyone else. For the best part of 2 days, Tonks remained unmoving in the hospital wing. She showed signs of continuous improvement, but she had yet woken. Sirius had informed Andy and Ted of what had happened, and they had both spent most of the 2 days with her. The one person who refused to leave her side, however, was Harry. No matter how often Madame Pomfrey offered her assurances or Sirius suggested it, he would not leave. He remained in the chair by her bed, bleary-eyed and contemplative. The investigation into what had happened was ongoing, and the DMLE were firmly involved due to the fatalities. Harry didn't care why it had happened, although he had a very good idea who was behind it. Come on, Harry, Andromeda Tonks called as she entered the hospital wing and approached the bed. You need to get some fresh air, some food and a wash, she instructed, her nose wrinkled in displeasure. I'm fine, Mrs. Tonks, he insisted. Andromeda giggled. Oh, you're under the impression that it was a request, she said sweetly as she patted his cheek. It wasn't, so you had better get a move on. Harry frowned at the woman. She was much more a black than he had expected. That tone was the very same one Aunt Cassie used when she was close to losing her temper, and then he knew he would be in trouble. Please, Harry, Andromeda continued with a pleading look. If she wakes whilst you are gone, I will send for you straight away, she promised. Harry deflated but nodded. Okay, he relented, but I want to know the minute she's awake. Andromeda nodded and watched as he left, a sad smile playing on her lips. Oh, Dora, she whispered as she stroked her daughter's hair, I doubt even he knows how bad he has it. Harry sighed contentedly as he turned off the shower and dried himself off. Physically, the food and the cleansing had worked wonders for him, and being rid of the dank stench of the lake was a welcome novelty. Physically, he felt better. Aesthetically, was another matter entirely. He was exhausted. He had barely slept since pulling Tonks from the lake, and when he did, he were right back at the edge of it again. The bags under his eyes were prominent, his skin pale and drawn, and the irises of his orbs considerably duller. With a shake of his head, he cast a few glamours to hide the trauma, the knit skin across his shoulders and side pulling tight as he raised his wand, a reminder that he had not escaped unscathed. To him, it was unimportant. The only thing that mattered was the woman lying prone a few corridors away because of the actions of other people. Still, his anger remained subdued, but it was there. He could feel it boiling beneath the surface of his calm exterior. He dressed himself in a pair of jeans and a green woolen jumper before pulling on a pair of boots and a jacket. The weather outside would still be bitterly cold, but he needed some air. Breathing in potion fumes and the like for the past 2 days had done little for him. He inhaled deeply as he exited the castle, the cold air burning his nose and lungs slightly. But it was invigorating. Having no desire to be anywhere near the lake, he headed to the main courtyard and took a few turns around it. The students were all in class, so he was able to enjoy the peace of isolation and took the time to work on his occlumency. He was upset by what had happened, and his facade had momentarily cracked under what had happened. He knew that he had to gather himself because sooner rather than later he would have to face the judges, and he would need a clear mind to explain exactly what had happened. Still, he hoped that they would see fit to disqualify him, for his sake as well as anyone else's involvement. It was clear now that it was not only him in danger. He had his doubts, however. Dumbledore seemed determined for him to remain as long as possible, even if that meant endangering others. That was a man he could not understand. His outward demeanor would suggest that he was a wise, infallible, and amiable man. His experience of him contradicted this entirely. Dumbledore had proven himself to be nothing more than a manipulative and interfering burden, one that seemingly believed what the naive people that followed his lead spewed about him. If only they knew, he muttered as he headed back inside the castle. He had no intention of revealing the man's nature. He knew his words would only fall on deaf ears and only result in him coming across as a petty, jealous liar. For as much as he despised the man, Dumbledore had cultivated beneficial relationships, and his reputation was nigh on untouchable with most. He was on a pedestal that many could only ever hope to achieve a fraction of the height of. Though Harry had no doubt that he would be there one day, his life and career was only just in its infancy. "There you are," Sirius sighed in relief as the man happened upon him on the second floor. "Is it Tonks?" Harry questioned immediately. "No," Sirius replied apologetically. "We have all been summoned for a meeting in Dumbledore's office," he explained. Harry nodded. "Let's go then, and see what excuses he has come up with for his laxity." "Leo has been summoned also, so we need to get him," Sirius replied as the two made their way onto the 3rd floor and into their rooms. They found the other boy sat at the table, his own appearance more tousled than usual, his eyes puffy from a lack of sleep. "It's time," Sirius informed him. Leo nodded as he stood and stretched. "Are you okay?" Harry asked his friend. "Aye," Leo answered. "I just haven't slept much." "I know the feeling," Harry snorted. "Come on, let's get this over with." The trio exited the room and made the short trip to the headmaster's office. The gargoyle sprang aside at their approach, and Harry knocked on the door. "Come in," Dumbledore called. The 3 of them entered to find the room filled almost to capacity. The judges and all 3 other champions were there, along with several other ministry officials, including the minister himself, who looked decidedly uncomfortable, even with the presence of Lucius Malfoy. "Please take a seat, gentlemen," Dumbledore offered. Sirius and Leo sat either side of him, ignoring the looks sent their way as they waited for the headmaster to begin. As the hosting school, it was his responsibility to address anything regarding the tournament. For the past 2 days, myself and the other judges, with the assistance of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, have been carrying out an investigation to ascertain what occurred during the second task, he began tiredly. "I will leave it to Madam Bones to explain what we found." The woman in question cleared her throat, her stony gaze sweeping across the room. We do not know how the attackers got into the lake. We can only assume that someone in the school granted them access. The main concern, however, is that the bodies we recovered showed signs of the imperious curse. The men and women that attacked did not do so of their own will. A moment of muttering followed her statement, and she cleared her throat once more. With that being said, the checking of the wands revealed the nature of the spells used, and we have deemed that the action taken by those that engaged them was justified. The fact that the life of one of my auras was saved only justifies the DMLE's stance on this, she finished, and retook her seat. Surely you jest, Amelia, the minister blustered disbelievingly. Those people were outright slain by the actions of those three, he added, pointing towards Sirius, Leo and Harry. Self-defense, Fudge, Harry returned, his nostrils flaring. Those people attempted to harm not only the champions and hostages, but they also attacked the mere people. Whether or not it was against their will, they still did it. As a master of how the imperious curse works, you should know. Fudge frowned. I am no master in the subject, he denied heatedly. And yet you were so willing to pardon people who claimed they were under it during Voldemort's uprising, Harry chided. Thank you for explaining the fact that you were not qualified to do so, he offered with a mocking bow. Malfoy was almost purple with rage, and Harry could have sworn he saw the usually stern Madame Bones hide a grin. Fudge sputtered before managing to compose himself. We are not here to discuss the Dark Lord, he seethed. We are here to discuss your conduct. Ah, so you are going to try and blame us for this whole debacle. How convenient for you, you suited monkey, Harry growled. It wasn't us that were lax with the security of the event, it wasn't any of us that cast the imperious curse, and it was not any of us that attacked innocent people and creatures. He spat as he rose to his feet, the anger he had held at bay now surging. I would suggest that you look in the right place to lay blame, Fudge. By now he was mere inches away from the minister, who was trembling under the onslaught. Harry, Sirius called, we don't want the minister soiling himself. Several people in the room stifled their laughter as Harry bared his teeth and backed away. Pathetic, he mumbled as he took his seat. Although I do not agree with his vitriol, Mr. Black does have a point, Dumbledore sighed. The three of them simply defended themselves, as did the other champions. The only person that can be held responsible is the person that instigated the incident. And I suppose we have no idea who that is? Sirius replied knowingly. No, we do not, Dumbledore sighed. However, the investigation will continue, he assured the man. And what of the tournament? The man asked, his accent heavily French. The tournament will proceed, but due to the circumstances of the second task, security will be tightened, and we have elected not to score each champion on their performance. The scores from the first task will stand, and that is what will influence the beginning of the third and final task, Barty Crouch explained. The man nodded, though it was with reluctance. It seemed that he too was hoping that the tournament would be called off. A small crack echoed throughout the room as a house elf appeared in front of Harry. Mr. Black? Sir, Mrs. Tonks asked Golly to tell you Miss Tonks is awake, sir. The creature informed him with a bow. Without a thought, Harry shot to his feet and sprinted from the office. Is there anything else? Sirius questioned. Dumbledore shook his head, his contemplative eyes still on the door the teen just exited. No, nothing else, for now. The third task will take place on the 26th of June. More details will be given to the champions closer to the time, he explained. Sirius nodded, and himself and Leo left the office, followed strangely by Madame Bones. He's turning into quite the man, that son of yours, she said with a shake of her head. Sirius grinned. He is, he concurred. I really thought Fudge was going to wet himself. Amelia snorted slightly. We need more people like him, she sighed. Far too many are happy to allow the minister his whims and haven't got the guts to go against him. Go against Malfoy, you mean? Sirius replied. Amelia nodded. Exactly, she agreed. Even James Potter doesn't bother with the Wizengamot. I had high hopes for him and for you when you were younger. I'm no politician, Sirius denied. I think the last thing we need is more of those. Amelia returned. We need someone who is not afraid to voice their opinions, and someone who doesn't care about ruffling a few feathers when needed. Your grandfather used to do that. Since he has been gone, the vermin have taken over. Sirius nodded. Grandfather doesn't give a damn anymore. It's like he says it is a game for younger men than he shrugged. Well, I hope one day someone will come along and shake things up. If it isn't Malfoy getting his way, it's Albus and his lot. Amelia sighed. They either worship the old bastard or are scared of Malfoy, Leo broke in. He's nothing but a shite. Amelia shook her head. True, but it won't change until either one of them are gone. Aye, both of them would be better, Leo smirked. Maybe, Amelia responded. Anyway, it is the health of my Aurora that concerns me the most. I will see you later, Sirius, she said with a smile before she turned down an adjoining corridor. Leo frowned. Is there something going on between you two? He asked. Sirius shook his head. No, he denied with a grin. She was a few years older than us at school. Oh, don't get me wrong. I tried, but Amelia Bones didn't fall for my charm, he grumbled. Leo chuckled. I don't know, Sirius. It might have just taken a couple of decades to work, he quipped before he continued walking. Sirius shook his head at the boy. Cheeky git, he muttered. She opened her eyes with a groan, her body equally weak as she was sore. The smell was the first thing she recognized, having been a frequent visitor here during her younger years. The stark whiteness of the walls and ceiling and the crispness of the sheets she found herself wrapped in only added credence to her first observation. But why was she here in the hospital wing? Oh, Dora, thank Merlin. She frowned at the voice of her mother and groaned once more when she felt familiar arms wrapped tightly around. Mum? She croaked. What's going on? She was confused. She could vaguely remember speaking to Barty Crouch and could even swear she had heard Harry whispering to her, but little else. She should have woken the moment she was pulled from the lake. That is what she had been told. The fact that she was dry and in bed meant that either Harry failed or something must have gone wrong. The thought caused her stomach to sink. Harry? She questioned, panic beginning to settle in. Harry is okay, Andromeda assured her, attempting to calm the frantic girl. He got you out, Dora, but it was a close thing, she choked. Mum, what happened? Tonks asked worriedly. Andromeda sniffed and shook her head. The champions were attacked. They're all fine, she added. No one really knows what happened, but you were cursed and almost died. Tonks frowned as her mother composed herself. Harry managed to keep you alive long enough with his magic whilst his friend killed the person that had been bound to you, she sighed. He's been in here the last 2 days. He only left because I forced him to. Tonks smiled slightly and swallowed deeply. He's a mess, Dora, Andromeda continued. Merlin knows the boy would have given you all of his magic if he had to. Tonks rubbed her eyes. She never could have imagined something like this happening. She had been assured that herself and the other hostages would be safe. With a little effort and some help from her mother, she managed to prop herself up on her pillows. Can you get him, please? She asked softly. Andromeda nodded and exited the room as Tonks did her best to calm her breathing. It's good to see you awake, Miss Tonks. The voice of Madame Pomfrey pulled her from her thoughts. I never thought I would see the day that you were my patient again. Tonks snorted. I just want to run a few checks so we can see how you're doing now that you're awake, the healer informed her. Tonks nodded and allowed the woman to go about her business. From experience, she knew that it would not do well to protest. Well, your magic is slowly replenishing. You can thank Mr. Black for that. Were it not for him, you might well have been left a squib, but it will take time. For the next week I want you to take a regimen of potions, and to refrain from casting anything, she advised. The metamorph sighed but nodded once more. She doubted that she could even cast a Loomis with how weak she felt. Your body will eventually purge the remainder of Mr. Black's magic, when your own is strong enough, so you may feel off for a while until it is gone, Pomfrey explained. You should consider yourself very lucky. I do, Tonks replied. I'd like you to remain here for another couple of days. It would be prudent to monitor you, to ensure no other issues arise now that you are awake, Madame Pomfrey finished. How is she? Andromeda questioned as she entered the room. Remarkably well, the healer replied. She will remain under my care for another 2 days, just to be safe. Andromeda nodded gratefully. Thank you, madam, she said, exhaling deeply. The healer gave her a smile and headed back towards her office, just as the door of the entrance was flung open. For a moment Harry simply stood and stared at Tonks, a myriad of expressions cycling through his features before he cleared space between them in a few long strides, and pulled her into his arms. I'll give you both some time, Andromeda declared as she made to leave. Pausing at the door, she smiled at the embracing pair before she left. I'm sorry, Harry whispered emotionally. Tonks shook her head. Why are you sorry? She asked gently. If it wasn't for you, I'd be dead. Harry shuddered at the words. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have been there in the first place, he countered. Tonks sighed as she pushed him away angrily. You will not blame yourself for this, she scolded him. I volunteered to do it because no one else would. More than that, I did it because I knew you would get me out. And you did. I survived, Harry, and that is all that matters. Harry sighed. I've never been so scared in my life, he mumbled, his eyes shining with fear. Not even with the dragon? Tonks returned with a grin. He shook his head fiercely. I'd rather face 100 of them than do that again, he answered. Tonks squeezed his hand tightly. I'm okay, Harry, she assured him. And I will be fine. Harry scrutinized her for a few moments before taking a deep breath. You'd better be, he muttered as he buried his head in her shoulder. The warmth she felt around him spread throughout her chest as she wrapped her arms around him, not willing to let go. She still could not fathom the feelings he incited within her, but she couldn't imagine him not being around. Saying goodbye to him at the end of the year would only get harder and was not something she could handle thinking about right now. Maybe it was how weak she felt in this moment or how strongly she felt for him. She couldn't be sure. The only thing she could be certain of was how amazing the feeling was of having someone who cared enough to do what he had done for her, not just during the task, but since she had met him. She didn't know what the future would hold, she just knew that he had to be a part of it. Whether their feelings would grow or if they were to be friends, to her, either would be preferable than for him to leave and no longer be in her life. I will get them, Dora, Harry spoke severely. Whoever did this to you will regret it. I can promise you that. Tonks snorted, but knew he meant every word. One thing she had learnt about Harry since she had met him was that he did not make empty threats, and there would be no one or nothing that would stop him when his mind was made up. I'd much rather you didn't go anywhere, she mused sadly. How is the girl? Arcturus questioned as Harry joined them at the table for the family meeting that had been put on hold. He nodded as he took his seat. Tonks had fallen asleep but was doing much better, much to his relief. She's fine, grandfather, he returned tiredly. Andromeda has asked to speak to Aunt Cassie to say thanks for what she did. She is no longer a member of this family, Cassiopeia replied with a glare. I will not entertain the woman. Harry slammed his hand on the table. Shooting to his feet, he stared down his aunt. Then you will treat her the same way you would any other person wanting to show you gratitude, he commanded. You will be humble. You will keep a civil tongue in your head, and you will let her say her piece. You will act the same way that you taught me and not throw it back in her face. She almost lost her daughter and she just want to say thank you. The least you can do is accept it. Arcturus, Sirius and Leo watched the standoff between the two with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Cassiopeia cackled as she stood. You do not tell me what to do, boy, she cooed mockingly as she drew her wand. The days of me fearing you are long past, Aunt Cassie. I will be the head of this family one day, and if you plan on remaining a part of it, you had better start realizing it. I love you, but now is not the time to argue with me. Do what I have asked of you, Harry replied before retaking his seat. Cassie frowned at him and turned her gaze towards Arcturus, who shrugged. He's right, the old man pointed out. It is exactly what you or I would have expected from him were he in the same position. Cassie deflated and shook her head as she sat. I preferred it when you were younger. I just had to look at you and you would shake like a leaf. She giggled. Fine, she agreed with a huff. But only because I will not be looked upon as a hypocrite. Thank you, Harry returned, receiving a nod of approval from his grandfather, who held his hands up for silence. The past couple of days have proven to be as fruitless as the rest of my investigation, he began gravely. What is clear is that there is someone within the school, working for him, someone who has the ability to bring people in undetected. Not necessarily, Sirius broke in. When I was here, we managed to sneak in and out of the school without getting caught. There's secret passages all over the place. Arcturus sighed. I want you to find every single one you know of and put it out of use. But be discreet, we do not want to tip our hand, he instructed the man. Sirius nodded. Other than that, there are no other trails to follow. Since all the attackers are dead, we cannot hope to find who put the curse on them. The only thing we can be certain of is that the person doing it is powerful and has access to ancient knowledge. That curse he put on the girl is not something you will find in Flourish and Blots, Arcturus explained. Not in this country, most likely, Cassie interjected. I found it in Turkey. A place where Voldemort has likely visited, Arcturus mumbled. As things are, we remain vigilant. The castle is on high alert, so I expect that whomever it is will try to keep a low profile. The third task is more likely when they will strike. Clearly, they like to plan as meticulously as possible. A sudden knock on the door drew the attention of everyone. With a deep frown, Arcturus opened it to reveal a very breathless Rita Skeeter, who pushed past him. I need to speak to you, Lord Black, she wheezed. What can I do for you, Miss Skeeter? Arcturus replied, his frown firmly in place. Malfoy and Fudge are going to call an emergency Wizengamot meeting in 3 days' time, the reporter revealed. They are going to use the events of the second task as a cover, and are going to try and force some kind of bill through, so that the Wizengamot can vote against allowing a new lord. They do not approve of taking the headship of a family. The Lord Black's nostrils flared as he chuckled darkly. I couldn't have set this up better than the idiots have done for me, he muttered. Can I assume that my invite will be lost? Rita nodded. As will many others, I suspect. If more than half are there, they can proceed, and any protests that come after will take months to repeal anything they pass. She shrugged. You've done well, Rita, Arcturus praised. Now, be a dear and inform the other families of the impending session, if you would. Quietly, of course, he instructed. Rita nodded and exited the room to carry out her task. That is a clear case of line theft, Sirius seethed. Not quite so clear, Arcturus sighed. If they pass the bill and do not act on it, then nothing untoward has happened. But I would bet every galleon in the vault that they will use the opportunity to strike. They simply have to if they wish for it to work, he explained. They only need time to install Draco as my heir, and that would take only a few days at most, if he can pass an inheritance test, though I doubt it would be so easy. The family magic recognizes Harry and will do so unless he was to die. Maybe that's exactly what they are planning, Leo broke in angrily. Perhaps, Arcturus conceded, but Lucius would not dirty his hands or name. If their coup was to go ahead and Harry died, questions would be asked. I doubt even Fudge would be able to save him. It is more likely they are hoping to take the airship politically first. If it doesn't work, then they may resort to other measures. So what do we do? Sirius questioned. You do nothing, Arcturus instructed. I have a way out of dealing with this. Lucius will end up dead, destitute, or both. But I will need your help, he finished, pointing at Leo. The boy frowned but nodded. Everyone else out, Arcturus commanded. The less any of you know, the better. Sirius, Harry, and Cassiopeia complied, each with an uneasy expression. What Fudge and Malfoy are doing is risky. They both know it, and that is why they are trying to conceal as best as possible, Arcturus began. They will have to act, and I will have to be there to react immediately, but there is a strong chance I will need you. Of course, Lord Black, Leo offered. I am planning on trapping them in a corner. When I make my move, Lucius will be left with one of two choices. He will either have to pay compensation to the house, a figure of my choosing, or he will have to agree to a duel that only a member of House Malfoy can fight on his behalf. Narcissa will be unable to do so as she is a Black, and he will not risk his heir. Arcturus explained. I'll do it, Leo cut him off. his demeanor uncharacteristically cold. Arcturus frowned at the boy. "You have a rather strong dislike for a man you have only met once," he mused aloud. "Is there more to this?" Leo nodded almost disappointedly. "Before I came here, I went to see the goblins in Ireland to take the inheritance test. They wouldn't do it until I graduated school," he reminded the man. "I remember," Arcturus replied. "My apologies, we've been so caught up in what was happening here that it slipped my mind." Leo waved him off. "I didn't know anything about my family. They only knew my first name because it was stitched into the baby grow I was found in," he continued. "So, you know all about your family?" Arcturus deduced. "Aye," Leo sighed. "My parents were both potioneers and their surname was Whalen. My mother was apparently a sweet lady and my father a good, hard-working, honest man. They refused to supply the Dark Lord, so they were killed. Malfoy was pardoned of their murders with his claim that he was under the Imperious curse when he took part in it. The others are all in Azkaban or dead." Arcturus nodded in understanding. "The name is familiar," he responded as he scratched his chin. "A small pure-blood family, but a respected one." "Aye," Leo confirmed with a sigh. "I never knew them, and I'm grateful for what I did have growing up. But when I met him and saw his smug grin, I knew I couldn't let it go. He took part in killing them and he has to pay for it." Arcturus patted his hand. "He will, and it will be you to give it to him. If you agree to help me, then I will make sure you get your chance. As you said, the others are either dead or in Azkaban," he shrugged. "Aye, for now," Leo snorted. "Even if it was anyone else, I would have done it for you. You and the rest of your family have done more for me than I could ever repay," he added with a smile. "You can count on me." Arcturus nodded. "I know," he responded. "You had better ready yourself." "He is a spineless coward, but a dangerous one," he advised as he made his way to the door and paused as he opened it. "I imagine that your parents would be as proud of you as I have been over the years," he offered, leaving a very thoughtful teen in his wake. Arcturus Orion Black observed the people passing him, filing away their names for future reference. It had been long over a decade since he last deigned a Wizengamot gathering with his presence. To him, the war had killed any political ambitions he had held. His family had fallen into ruin, and he no longer had the patience to partake in the fickle practice. And now he felt the years he had lived, they had caught up with both his body and mind. He no longer felt the sharp and intuitive young man he once was. He had grown old, and it would soon be time to pass the torch to his heir. Harry had proven himself worthy, he just needed to do the same one final time in the arena. He would be damned if he let Malfoy seize everything his family had worked for, and he fully intended to teach the man the error of his ways. For too many years he had lacked an opponent with the needed ruthlessness, but today he would get a reminder as to why it is not wise to cross the House of Black. They would all be reminded of such folly. Although he had tasked Rita with informing the other lords of what Fudge and Malfoy were up to, he himself had been in contact with a select few, the old hands that remained as head of their respective families from when he had last attended a meeting. He trusted none, but they would remember his presence. They would not want to risk his ire. They may not have always agreed with his views or methods, but they respected him and respected tradition. They would not take kindly to such a move by Malfoy. He dropped his disillusionment charm as Tiberius Ogden approached and gestured for the man to join him in one of the side rooms he had commandeered for the morning. "Ogden," he greeted the man as he closed the door behind the two. "I'm pleased you could make it." Ogden gave him a forced smile. "I almost threw Skeeter out on her ass until she mentioned your name, Black," the man replied in a gravelly voice. "So it is true." Arcturus nodded and Ogden cursed under his breath. "What is Malfoy playing at? He must be desperate to make a move like this," he sighed. "Or cocky," Arcturus countered. "From what I've heard, the Wizengamot has turned into a bunch of worthless yes-men with no balls." Ogden shrugged. "It's not the same here, Black," he explained. "With Malfoy and his block, the only other viable option is Dumbledore and his own. One too lax, and the other extreme. There's no real choice but to choose one." Arcturus shook his head. "Cowards," he grumbled. What happened to the days where people spoke their minds and thought for themselves? He added. That's why things like this happen. People are too happy to bow down to the scumbags like Malfoy and Fudge. People remember the Voldemort years, Black, Ogden corrected. We all know who followed him and people are still afraid. Why risk yourselves and your family for an agenda that will fail whether or not you speak up? Best to keep your mouth shut. As I said, cowards, Arcturus bit back. Happy to complain that things aren't going the way they want but don't have the stones to do anything about. It's easy for you to say, Ogden returned heatedly. Most of your lot were on his side. Arcturus shrugged. True, he conceded, but I never bowed to him. I told the bastard from the start I had no intention of offering my support. Even the Dark Lord knew not to provoke my house. Ogden shook his head. It is only us that remember that fear your name, Black, he pointed out. Those in there are not the same people as back in our day. They're young and foolish. And today they will get their first lesson on who really is at the top of the pecking order. They can either learn it the easy way or the hard way, Arcturus replied carelessly. Ogden chuckled. We rarely saw eye to eye back in the day, Black, but I am behind you all the way on this. The shits in there need to learn some humility, he agreed. Arcturus nodded. Then we just have to wait for the others and make our move, he explained. Let us turn back the years one more time. Cornelius Oswald Fudge took his seat as the rest of the lords the Lucius insisted be here filed into the room. He himself was not particularly comfortable with the course of action they were taking, but his longtime friend had insisted upon it. To Cornelius it seemed that it would end very badly when word was spread of what they did. Dolores, his ever-faithful secretary, took a seat to his left as Lucius filled the one on his right. Now they had to wait for the riskiest factor of their endeavor, the arrival of the chief warlock. This was the part of the plan that Cornelius refused to accommodate. Lucius had done all he could to convince him to exclude the man, but Dumbledore would have to be present. Even an emergency session could not proceed without him here. I think we have waited long enough, Dolores muttered into his ear. Cornelius removed his bowler hat and fiddled with it as he shook his head. Nonsense, Dolores, he returned. He began tapping his foot impatiently as the other lords looked at him expectantly. Lords Bold, Thickness, Rowell, and of course Lucius in particular seemed keen to get events underway. Cornelius, Dumbledore greeted as he swept into the chamber. He paused briefly and frowned at the assembly before taking his own seat. Well, get on with it, Dumbledore, Malfoy urged irritably. We all have homes to return to. I believe that it would be prudent to wait a while longer for any other members that will be arriving, the older man replied. Lucius turned his attention to the minister, who sighed internally. Proceed, Albus, he instructed. Dumbledore narrowed his eyes at the man suspiciously before announcing the start of the session with a few taps of his gavel. I call to order this emergency meeting of the Wizengamot, dated February 27, 1994, he announced. This meeting was requested at the behest of the minister, so I leave the floor to him. Cornelius nodded and stood stiffly as he shuffled the papers he had brought. Now I have gathered us here today to discuss the events surrounding the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, he began, refusing to meet the penetrating stare of the chief warlock. Thankfully, I have managed to ensure that the press does not reveal the details of what transpired so that we may discuss it amongst ourselves. Cornelius, Dumbledore interrupted. You are aware that a full inquiry has been carried out by the judges and also the DMLE under your instruction, he pointed out. We all agreed that it was an unfortunate occurrence and that all acted in the best interest of themselves and the witches and wizards in attendance. The tone the man used was bordering on hostile, but Cornelius ignored it in favor of looking towards his most staunch of supporters. Lucius merely nodded once for him to proceed. That notwithstanding, we must bring into question the actions of Mr. Black and his associate, he countered heatedly. Several men and women lost their lives that day because of what they did. Personally, I feel very uncomfortable that a boy of Black's nature will one day sit amongst us a peer. Those within the room gave a resounding cry of agreement. To prevent such a thing, I have drafted this bill, he announced as he waved a large piece of parchment. This bill will allow us all the rights to veto any undesirable heir of an ancient and noble house, if we collectively agree that they will not conform correctly to the standards we as a body must abide by. It is my belief the heir Black is one such person. Again, calls of agreement were unanimously given. You are playing a very dangerous game, Cornelius, Dumbledore warned. Strong arming legislation through will not sit well with the other lords, and interfering with a house as old and dangerous as the Blacks is not wise. Madam Umbridge giggled. The Blacks no longer hold the power they once had. It is such a shame to see such a family fall so far, she simpered. Dumbledore shook his head. This was going to end very badly and likely in bloodshed. The Blacks were not as powerless as Dolores believed. Arcturus and Cassiopeia may be in their advanced years, but Harry was not, and the boy had more potential than any of these could fathom. Provoking him alone was not a politically astute move. It will be put to the vote, Fudge announced. All in favor, raise your wands. All within the room complied, minus the chief warlock. With a majority vote, the bill has passed. It will now be passed around the room. Sign it, and it shall be, the minister declared, his smile belying the trepidation he felt. He felt scarcely better even after the signed document had been returned to his waiting hands. The trepidation gave way to fear as the chamber door burst open and the other lords entered, led by none other than the Lord Black himself. "You're too late, Black," Lucius sneered. "The document has been approved and signed by the majority." Arcturus simply smirked as he shrugged. "Then you have my congratulations, Lord Malfoy," he replied with a bow. "Could you be a good man and explain what it entails? I find that in my later years, so many things go over my head." Lucius' sneer remained as he took the signed parchment from a very pale minister. "This law gives us the right to vote against any inheriting a lordship that we deem unfit. In this case, we were just about to vote on your current heir. We believe that he would be most unsuitable for the position," he explained with a smirk. Arcturus sighed. "Then proceed, Lord Malfoy," Arcturus offered defeatedly. Lucius nudged the minister, who shook himself from his stupor. "All of those who believe that the current heir to the Black family is unsuitable, raise your wand," he commanded. Those that had initially voted for the bill raised their wands once more. "Those against?" Fudge followed up. Arcturus, along with the lords that accompanied him, raised theirs. Umbridge made an exaggerated attempt to tally the votes for each and smiled sweetly. "It appears that the majority are in agreement, Lord Black," she informed him sweetly. Arcturus nodded stiffly as he caught Dumbledore's confused stare. "Then surely you must name my new successor," the Black Patriarch growled irritably. "As far as I am aware, there is only one suitable candidate." Lucius addressed the room diplomatically. "My son, Draco Scorpius Malfoy. He is a direct descendant of the Black line through his mother Narcissa." The gathered lords muttered their agreement. "If no one has any objections, then it shall be Draco who will inherit the title of Lord Black upon the current lord's passing or stepping down," Fudge announced as he withdrew another piece of parchment. The lords that voted in favor of the bill and Harry's expulsion signed the document, and Lucius placed it in his pocket when it had been completed. "If there is no other business," Fudge began, only to be cut off by Arcturus. "Oh, I'm only just getting started," he shouted gleefully. "Did you really expect me to just sit back and allow this farce to just happen? I am the Lord Black, and it seems that some of you have forgotten where exactly you sit in relation to me and my line." Fudge felt his stomach sink as the man's grin turned almost feral. "You bunch of overblown shits have just sealed your own fates," he continued as he pointed towards those that had dared oppose him. "I will remember this, and those of you will remember that the vengeance of the Blacks is something to behold. But for now, there is one I must deal with, so I suggest you all pay attention because you may just learn something." He turned his attention to a now frowning Lucius. "You stupid, arrogant shitstain," he chastised the man disappointedly. "You married into a better family than you deserved because your father was a respectable man. You, on the other hand, hold less worth than the dregs of my piss." Lucius began to purple in fury. "You idiots can't just expect to sign a piece of paper and think that what you say goes. Magic decides the heir of my family. Not your manipulations or any other maneuvers you make in here, Arcturus continued. He laughed at the looks of confusion sent his way. The magic of the Blacks has already accepted my heir and given him his magical inheritance. You can't just simply decide to interfere with the will of magic, he pointed out with a shake of his head. His seemingly jolly demeanor fell as he glared at Malfoy and the minister. Passing that law was your first mistake. Attempting to interfere with my family was second, and trying to name your idiot offspring my heir was number 3, he declared furiously. He reached within his robes and removed a roll of parchment. You can pass all the laws you want, but your son will never inherit the Black Lordship. This scroll, he called loudly as he held it aloft, is a missive from Gringotts, signed on the 22nd of this month, expelling both Draco and Narcissa Malfoy from the House of Black. Lucius and Fudge both paled as the other lords muttered amongst themselves. What that means is that you have all attempted to commit line theft, Arcturus informed them. As the main perpetrator, I will deal with House Malfoy. First of all, I demand compensation, Lucius. And for the transgression against my family, I get to name my price as our law dictates. Lucius swallowed deeply, his heart sinking into his stomach. This had not at all gone to plan. Reluctantly he nodded, knowing he had no other alternative. He had attempted to play the game and had been beaten soundly. Arcturus must have somehow discovered what he was up to. Your price? He croaked, his attempt to maintain his composure failing. Arcturus grinned. You will pay me the sum of 50 million galleons, he responded. Lucius paled further and shook his head, his throat constricted by fear. The other lords were shocked by such an extreme demand. It would ruin me, he choked. Arcturus scratched his chin thoughtfully. It would, but I'm sure I can at least give you a fighting chance, he mused aloud. How about a duel? There are, of course, conditions, Lucius scoffed. He was not foolish enough to engage any of the Blacks in a fight. He fought a smirk as a new idea formed, one that could see his efforts come to fruition after all. Why would I fight? I have nothing to gain, he replied. Name your prize, Arcturus offered. Draco will become your heir, Lucius responded immediately. However, none that carry the name Black can fight. You have to find another willing to stand against my family, he added, and gave the old man a sickly smile. They also must be pure of blood. Arcturus narrowed his eyes and nodded thoughtfully. Fine, he agreed, much to the shock of the other man, but it must be a male that carries the name Malfoy that will represent you. It was your family that attempted to usurp my own, so it must be a Malfoy that fights. Lucius ground his teeth and was tempted to simply hand over his wealth. Something else was afoot, he knew, but the attraction of having the Black fortune in his hands proved to be too much. Besides, it wasn't like any of the families Black had brought with him could stand against him. No pure blood that he knew of would. The name Malfoy was one to be feared. Agreed, Lucius growled. If my champion wins, your wealth will be given to them, Arcturus returned. Lucius felt his anger rise. And if I win, then you will pay the sum from your account into mine, he demanded, though he could not help but think he had just agreed to exactly what Arcturus Black wanted. He knew that he had no choice unless he wished to simply hand over every last knut in his vault. At least this way he had a fighting chance. Arcturus nodded and grinned. The rest of you shits will all pay me the sum of 100,000 galleons within the next month, or you will face a similar fate to Malfoy, he instructed. I do hope you don't make me come for you. I can assure you that I will not be so amiable. The lords grumbled under their breaths, but made no protest. In the circumstances, they had gotten off very lightly. Arcturus could have demanded much more from them. That includes you, Fudge, Arcturus addressed the minister. If you attempt to pull anything like this again, I will ensure that you do not see the next day in your position. They won't even employ you here to clean the toilets. And when will this duel take place, Black? Lucius broke in. 2 weeks today. Arcturus confirmed. I believe there is a very nice Quidditch stadium set doing nothing left over from the World Cup. Lucius nodded his agreement as Arcturus turned and walked towards the exit. Oh, and Malfoy, he called, you will be checked before the fight. Wands only, and if anyone interferes in any way you will forfeit immediately, and your wealth will be seized, he warned. And don't worry, I will inform the press. We don't want the public to miss out. Lucius grit his teeth. Your champion? He demanded. You will name them now. Arcturus nodded. You know him, Lucius? Young Leo, the one you so generously rewarded for saving Draco's life? Arcturus explained before exiting the room. Lucius didn't know if the using the boy was foolish or a stroke of genius. What he did know was that he needed to find out more about him before they met. Leo toweled himself off, having taken a much-needed shower after his training session with Charlie this morning. The boy was showing a lot of promise with the progression he was making. He would never be a magical powerhouse, but he would certainly be able to look out for himself. With Harry spending time with Tonks and Sirius and Cassie working on what Arcturus had tasked them with, he decided that he would eat his breakfast in the Great Hall, hopefully getting to spend a little time with Katie, even if he did have to tolerate the twins' presence. He entered the hall, and all eyes shifted towards him, many staring at him in disbelief and others with hostility. He returned the glare of these as he made his way towards the Gryffindor table and was met with sight of a very subdued Katie, an almost worshipping pair of redheads, and looks of incredulity from the others. Are you really dueling Lucius Malfoy? Charlie asked. Leo frowned as he took his seat. That was indeed his intention, but he did not know how everyone found out. The answer to that conundrum became clear as the boy slid the morning's edition of the Daily Prophet towards him, the front page depicting a picture of himself and the aforementioned Lord. Attempted line theft shames prominent family, by Rita Skeeter. It is not unusual for differing opinions within the political arena to cause divides amongst our revered peers, and often such matters result in ongoing rifts between opponents. What transpired in the early hours of yesterday morning, however, can only be described as dirty politicking at best. Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge called an emergency meeting of the Wizengamot in which discussions of what transpired during the second task of the Triwizard Tournament were to be held. Due to legal action taken by the ministry, details of these events are unable to be mentioned. What was discussed was not what was on the agenda, and the minister, acting in association with Lucius Malfoy and other staunch supporters, used the opportunity to pass a very controversial bill, details of which can be found on the next page. Ultimately, the bill would give power to the Wizengamot as a body to veto a Lord's choice of heir if they deemed the candidate to be unworthy of such a title. Shockingly, the legislation was passed with little protest, mostly due to the absence of many members of the government, and as those within the chambers celebrated their perceived victory, the Lord Black arrived with the other lords in tow. What followed was a moment that will go down in history as the Black Patriarch chastised those that voted in favor of the bill. In an attempt to seize the upper hand, the minister and Lord Malfoy immediately held a vote to deem the Lord Black's current heir, Harry Black, the fourth champion in the tournament, as unworthy. Despite protests from the Chief Warlock and Lord Black himself, the motion carried and attempted to install Lord Malfoy's son Draco as the new heir to the family. Little did both men know Lord Black had anticipated such a move. He then presented a document stating that both Draco and Lord Malfoy's wife Narcissa, now a member of House Black, had been expelled from the family days prior to the vote. Ultimately, this means that Lord Malfoy had in fact attempted, unknowingly or not, to commit line theft against a most ancient and noble house. The penalty for such a transgression, for those that do not know, is either death, monetary compensation of the victim's choice, or even a duel. Demonstrating his ruthlessness, Lord Black firstly demanded that House Malfoy pays compensation amounting to 50 million galleons, but eventually, and generously in many opinions, allowed Lord Malfoy a chance of redemption via a duel. Initially, Lord Malfoy refused, but evidently had a change of heart only moments later. Lord Black demanded that only a man with the name Malfoy could represent his family, and that should his own champion win, the Malfoys would be liable to pay the demanded compensation. Lord Malfoy had his own stipulations. those being that no member of House Black were allowed to represent them. The choice of champion had to be of pure blood status, and that if he won, his son would be the next Lord Black and the family would pay the sum to the Malfoys. Lord Black immediately agreed, much to the surprise of this reporter, and named his champion as Leo Whelan, an Irish pure-blood lord of a small family thought to have become extinct during the last war. So, what do we know about this young man? In essence, very little. We know that he is currently an apprentice under the infamous Cassiopeia Black and that he was educated at schools in both Japan and Russia. Just how this boy came to be involved with the family is unknown, but it is widely known that he is a close friend of Harry Black. The duel is set to take place Monday, 13th March. We will of course release more details when they become available. By the time he had finished reading, Leo was grinning victoriously, his magic reacting in anticipation. "Is it true?" Charlie asked once more, breaking him from his thoughts. "Aye," Leo confirmed. "Lord Black asked me a few days ago." At his reply, Katie stood and stormed from the room as he watched in confusion. "Oh, you're in trouble now," one of the twins warned. "A lot of it," the other added. Leo frowned at the pair. "Did you not think that this was something you should have mentioned to her?" Alicia questioned him angrily. His frown remained, and Alicia and Angelina shook their heads in disapproval before following their friend. "What did I do?" he questioned the redheads. "Ah, it is more of what you didn't do," Fred replied. "Even we know something like this should be discussed," George continued. Leo dragged a hand down his face in frustration. Women were turning out to be more complicated than he ever thought they would be. "Maybe I should go after her?" he asked. Fred shook his head. "Let her vent first. You don't want to walk in on that inquisition," he advised. "It's not pretty." Leo nodded and sighed deeply. He had no idea what he'd done wrong, but he would give her some time before seeking her out. He certainly didn't want to make things worse. He turned his attention to his breakfast and realized his appetite had vanished, replaced with a strange sense of guilt. No longer wanting to eat, he decided to go for a walk and get away from the whispering students within the hall. It was as he was exiting that an arrogant voice called out to him, and his hands curled into fists. "My father is going to kill you," the younger Malfoy shouted gleefully. Leo smirked as he stalked towards the boy, pleased that he now seemed to regret his outburst, cowing as he approached. "Your father is a shite, you're a shite, and I will choke him with his own balls," he vowed in a deadly whisper. "Instead of sitting here, you should be thinking very hard about what your last words to him will be. Because he will be gone, and every last piece of gold to his name will become mine. Your family will fade into nothing, and you will become worse off than the poorest of families. Just remember that, little Draco, when you're begging for your next turn on the streets." Malfoy swallowed deeply and rushed from the room, no longer exhibiting his cockiness. Leo watched him leave in disgust before he exited amidst more whisperings from the gathered students and staff. The head of Slytherin House looked as though he would say something, but evidently thought better of it. With little else to do and no motivation to study, Leo took a few turns around the grounds and then headed back inside. The weather was slowly easing off, but the castle was now being plagued with the final showers of winter, and despite using warming and drying charms, it was still an unpleasant walk. He approached the portrait of Sir Cadogan, pondering the thought of a hot shower, when the knight spoke him. "Young man, a maiden came looking for you. She asked to relay a message that she shall wait for you atop the astronomy tower," he explained with a bow. "Thank you," Leo returned, his footsteps changing in the direction pointed. He opened the door to another torrential downpour, and the sight of Katie with her back to him, her eyes focused on the forest across the way, sheltered beneath a Muggle umbrella. "Are you okay, lass?" he asked worriedly, breaking her from her own musings. She turned towards him, and he immediately noticed she was lacking her usual vibrancy. Her dark brown eyes were rimmed red and absent of the usual light makeup she wore. She shrugged and smiled sadly in response. He closed the distance between them, but he was unsure on what he should do. Unable to think of anything else, he pulled her into his arms and relished the feeling and her scent. "You're mad at me," he stated. "I'm not mad," she replied with a shake of her head. "Well, I am a little," she added. She mumbled something indiscernible into his chest. "I didn't hear you, lass," Leo said apologetically. I'm scared, Katie huffed as she pulled away from him, her eyes filled with tears. Scared? Leo asked with a frown. Katie nodded. You might die, she explained. Leo barked out a laugh but stopped when he saw the glare of the girl. Don't you care? She questioned heatedly. Haven't you thought about what it would do to other people if you die? Leo deflated as he shook his head. I've never had anyone that cares like that, he sighed. I was always told I was worth nothing and that I would die nothing. I was taught not to fear it. Katie poked him hard in the chest. I care, you idiot, she bit back. Leo was taken aback by her words as a wave of guilt washed over him. I'm sorry, lass, he whispered. You should be, she replied angrily. Leo took a deep breath. I'm not good at this, he muttered. I've never had anyone I had to explain myself to. I've always done what I had to. Katie shook her head at him. It's not like that anymore, she said as she took one of his hands. I care about you and you have to at least think about me when things like this happen. Leo nodded. You're right and I'm sorry, he replied. I didn't know it would be in the paper and I should have spoken to you about it. Yes, you should have. This might be normal for you, but it isn't for me, she explained. My parents own a pub. The worst I've seen is my dad in a fist fight. She took a calming breath. I'm scared for you and I'm scared that I'll lose you, she continued. Lucius Malfoy is a very dangerous man. What the hell made you agree to it? Leo stepped away from her to compose himself. He hadn't thought about what it would do to anyone else. He only had one thing on his mind during his conversation with Arcturus. Malfoy is one of the Death Eaters that killed my parents, he revealed to her. He got away with it and I can't just let it go, lass. Oh, I didn't know that, Katie answered apologetically. Leo gave her a weak smile. Other than that, Lord Black asked me. I owe him more than I could ever repay. He wouldn't put me in this position if he didn't think I could win, he added. Katie wrapped her arms around him. It doesn't stop me being scared, she mumbled. I know, Leo comforted her. But it will take a better man than Malfoy to do the job. Katie sighed as she nodded. Promise me that you won't do anything stupid like this again without talking to me first, she demanded, eliciting a chuckle from him. She was a stubborn girl, one of the things he respected about her. I promise, he returned. She looked at him defiantly for a moment longer before nodding her acceptance. I thought Ange and Alicia had it bad with the twins, she grumbled. I'm nothing like the Gingers, Leo defended. No, you're much worse, she quipped with a grin before kissing him gently. Charlie Potter pushed the food around on his plate using his fork, his worry outweighing his hunger considerably. He had come to like Leo a lot over the past weeks, even though he cursed his name during their training sessions. He was a genuine guy, one of the few that had ever been completely honest with him. If his performance was not up to standard, he had no qualms in telling him but would equally help him improve in the areas needed. He wasn't worried that he would lose to Malfoy, he just didn't trust the other man to abide by any agreement he made. Lucius was as slippery as they came, and Charlie did not trust the man to use underhand tactics to ensure he would win. He was pulled from his thoughts by the conversation being had between his parents. How can they expect a 16-year-old boy to beat him? His mother questioned his father heatedly. I don't know, Lils, James sighed, but Arcturus Black wouldn't risk so much if he wasn't certain. Lily shook her head. Unless he is just as mad as the rest of them, she shrugged. Charlie frowned. Leo will destroy Malfoy, he interjected hotly. Lily raised an eyebrow at her son. And what do you know of it? She asked. You've barely spoken to him. Charlie tried and failed to hide his look of guilt. Nothing, he answered quickly, putting some chicken into his mouth. Both his mother and father frowned at him. Charlie, James chided, is there something you want to tell us? The boy shook his head frantically, attempting to avoid the penetrating stare of them both. Seeing that his denial was not being accepted, he hung his head. He had tried to keep it from them, but now knew he had been caught out. They would not give in until he broke under their collective gazes. I can't, I promised I wouldn't say, he sighed. Lily looked towards her husband and gave him a nod. Charlie, you won't be in trouble, he assured his son. Unless you've been doing something that will get you into trouble. Charlie shook his head. Harry and Leo have been training me, he muttered defeatedly. Training you? Lily questioned, her eyes narrowed. How? Charlie nodded. They've been taking me for runs and teaching me how to defend myself without magic. They've even started teaching me how to maximize my reserves so that I don't use too much of it. It's okay, he defended. Harry has been filling up my belt when we are done, and they both meet me outside the common room and take me back before breakfast. His parents looked on in disbelief before Lily smiled. I'm pleased that you are spending time with him, she offered warmly. I wish you wouldn't have kept it from us, but as long as you are being safe, then I don't see any problem. Charlie frowned in confusion. He hadn't expected this reaction from her. How long has this been going on? James asked. Since the new year, Charlie sighed. Almost 2 months, James mused aloud as he nodded. All right, show me what you've learned. Now? Charlie returned wide-eyed. James nodded as he stood. Charlie swallowed nervously as he followed suit. His father was excellent with his wand. There were very few that would wish to fight him. He walked in the wake of his parents as they exited the room and entered a classroom a short distance down the corridor. As the door closed behind him, his father removed his jumper and slid his wand into his hand, gesturing for Charlie to prepare himself. For his own comfort and movement, he took off his robes and nodded when he was ready. James raised an eyebrow at his son before firing off a stunner, only to be caught off guard as Charlie turned to avoid it with much more agility than he had expected. He gave an appreciative nod and fired 2 more, one either side. Charlie, having anticipated the move, twirled into the path of the one to his left as he produced his gifted shield and deflected the spell back towards his father, who had to move to avoid it. He received an approving smile from the man before another onslaught was sent his way. He knew that his father was holding back, but what he was facing paled in comparison to what Leo put him under, and he dodged and batted the spells away with ease. Enough, James called after a few minutes of watching the boy work. He beamed with pride as he approached and ruffled his hair. That was brilliant, Charlie. Charlie shrugged. It was Leo and Harry that taught me. Not that they gave me much of a choice. Harry seems to think Voldemort is coming back soon and they insisted I learn something, he explained. James and Lily shared a worried yet knowing look. It doesn't hurt to be ready, James agreed with the sentiment of his older son. No, it doesn't, Lily added. What else have they been teaching you? James asked. They've been making me physically fitter and how to fight without magic, he answered with a grin as he discreetly drew a blade and threw it into the door, missing his mother by only a few inches. James laughed at her horrified expression. Where did you get that? He asked as he retrieved and inspected it. Leo gave it to me, Charlie answered. That one is just a knife that will temporarily blind someone if it doesn't kill them straight away. The others I have are less pleasant, he added with a grimace. James frowned at the thought of the boy having such weapons at his disposal, but couldn't help but think they may be necessary sooner than he'd like. He would need to have a word with SIRIUS and see what exactly was happening that he did not know about. Do you think the boy is good enough to beat Malfoy? James questioned Charlie seriously. He received a severe nod in return. He had only seen a little of what Leo was capable of, and that was enough to have no doubts in his ability to handle someone like Malfoy. He's brilliant, Dad, he answered solemnly. Malfoy won't know what hit him. James nodded. I will have to see for myself, he declared. Can I come? Charlie asked excitedly. James narrowed his eyes slightly as he held up a hand to silence the impending protests from his wife. He pondered it for a moment before nodding. As much as he wished he could protect his son from such things, Voldemort was as dangerous and resourceful as they came, and he would have his sights set firmly on the Potters. Yes, he agreed, but you will stay with myself and your mother and do exactly as we say. I have no faith in Malfoy's credibility. He will be planning something. Charlie nodded eagerly. He had never seen a real duel before, and were it not for his friend's participation, he would be relishing the opportunity much more. You asked to see me, Headmaster, Severus Snape greeted as he entered the office. Severus, take a seat, sherbet lemon, he offered. Severus shook his head as he sat and waited for the man to get to the point. I asked you here to discuss young Mr. Malfoy, Dumbledore informed him. And what is it that Draco has done? The surly man returned. Nothing, as yet, the headmaster placated, but I fear he will end up in trouble if he is not tempered. We cannot allow what is happening between the Blacks and the Malfoys within these walls. Snape snorted. Arcturus Black is a fool for what he has done. Dumbledore shook his head gravely. Lord Black is as sharp as ever. He took a perceived threat against his family and orchestrated a rather ingenious reaction. I do not agree with what is to come, but should all go to plan, he would have the reputation he once possessed, he sighed. Severus's lips curled in distaste. The boy is 16, he pointed out. Lucius is not an ungifted wizard, that we can agree on, but the boy is exceptionally gifted, Dumbledore replied as he removed a sheaf of parchment from within his desk and handed it to the potions master. Severus skimmed through the paper and found himself grudgingly impressed by what he read. How did you come by this? He asked with a frown. My position within the ICW has certain privileges, Dumbledore shrugged. As you can see, the boy is dangerous. His education in both Japan and Russia, heavily focused on battle, as is the nature of the schools. Lucius would do well not to underestimate him. To receive honors such as young Lord Wayland has is quite the feat. Snape sighed as he handed back the parchment, torn on whether he should have a conversation with the father of his godson. A part of him wanted to more than anything to take a stab at the Blacks. His more logical side, however, voiced against such actions. If the boy survived and he were to somehow be found out, his life would be forfeit. What do you wish for me to do? He asked. Keep Draco away from him, Dumbledore instructed firmly. If he takes it upon himself to goad the boy and gets hurt, there is little I can do to protect him in the circumstances. Severus nodded and left. He had laughed at the thought of the boy fighting Lucius. He was a very dangerous man, and well versed in magics most knew nothing of. Now he pitied the blonde. If he managed to survive, it would be a miracle. Harry's magic was taking longer to purge than Madame Pomfrey had estimated, leaving Tonks feeling rather unwell and unable to access her own. Her wand felt foreign in her hands, and even her morphing was proving to be impossible, much to her worry. After another visit to the school matron, she felt better, having been ensured that it may be taking longer due to the power and nature of the magic within her, but she was well on her way to recovery. Do you think Leo can actually win? She asked, her head positioned in Harry's lap whilst they lounged on the sofa within her quarters. Harry chuckled. Lucius Malfoy would be wise to shop for a tombstone, he answered with a shake of his head. Leo may seem like a nice guy, and he is for the most part, but he's not someone you want to get on the wrong side of. I've seen what he is capable of. He's that good? Tonks questioned. Harry frowned slightly. His magic is more in tune with combat spells. It's just what he is naturally gifted in. It took years for him to have any real finesse to his work, but Aunt Cassie drilled him constantly when he was home. He's more of a smash-through with force than an intricate deconstruction kind of person, he explained. Tonks nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of Cassiopeia, has she decided when she is going to see Mum yet? Harry exhaled deeply. She's sulking at the minute, he muttered. She really doesn't like being told what to do. Tonks grinned as she turned to face him. So that's where you get it from, she said. Harry narrowed his eyes at her. You should be much nicer to me, Dora, he warned. I'm the one looking after you. I could always add a little something to your potions if you misbehave. The metamorph pouted. You wouldn't do that to little old me, she replied confidently. Harry growled. She was right, of course. Or, now who's sulking? Tonks cooed. Is that part of the criteria to be a Black? Harry grinned. You might find out one day if I decide I want to keep you around long enough, he returned half-jokingly. Tonks blushed briefly before frowning. You shouldn't say things like that, she chastised. Not if you don't mean them. I wouldn't say it if I didn't, he shrugged. It will have to happen one day, and I'd rather it be someone that I enjoy being with. If grandfather had his way, I'd already be in a contract with someone trying to better their family position who I'd probably want to kill. Tonks giggled, but didn't like the thought of him being in that kind of position. Has he tried to marry you off already? Harry sighed and dragged a hand through his hair. No, but as soon as he retires, I will have to think about it. The family is small and I will need at least one heir and probably a few kids in reserve, he grumbled. You don't want children? She asked. I do, Harry answered quickly. I don't just want them to increase the size of the family or for political things. I want them to have a real childhood in a proper home. Even with Sirius, Cassie was always there teaching me how to be a proper black and all the political stuff I had to know. It would have been nice to have some normality. I was only young when I was given away, but I do remember that James and Lily liked to do family things when we could. He finished. Tonks nodded. You can do both, she pointed out. Not everything has to be about politics or training them. You don't want miniature Arcturus and Cassiopeia running around, she joked. Harry grimaced. No, I don't, he agreed. Anyway, it is time for your potions and I need to give Aunt Cassie a reminder to see your mother. I hope she would have done it by now. Tonks pouted again as he stood and retrieved a vial of the disgusting brew. Don't be like that, he chuckled as he handed it to her. It will help you get better, he pointed out before kissing her gently. Fighting the urge to deepen it, he gave her a smile as he exited to find his aunt, knowing that she would more than likely draw her wand on him if he pressed the issue too much. Cassiopeia Black was still cursing her nephew under her breath as she arrived in a typical Muggle neighborhood, sneering in the direction of the houses they dwelled in. She had been so close to attacking the impudent whelp for his insistence, but thought better of it. She was a black and was expected to conduct herself accordingly. Drawing her wand on her future head of house, no matter how tempting, was not acceptable. Even Arcturus would have had to expel her from the family for such a move. She'd swallowed her pride, probably for the first time in her life, and agreed to meet with Andromeda. Just thinking of the girl filled her with shame as she approached the front door and knocked, wiping her hand on her robes just in case one of the filthy muggles nearby had touched it. Miss Black? Andromeda greeted her formally as the front door was opened. Mrs. Tonks, Cassiopeia replied stiffly. I understand that you wish to speak with me. Andromeda nodded and stepped aside. Please come in, she offered. Cassiopeia grimaced at the thought but entered the property, avoiding touching anything. So this is where you ran off to, she said before you could stop herself. Andromeda stiffened, her eyes hardening. I did not run, she hissed. I was kicked out. For getting knocked up by a mudblood, Cassiopeia returned hotly. Andromeda gritted her teeth and forced herself to calm down. We are not here to discuss the past, she huffed. There is nothing to discuss, Cassiopeia shrugged. Your actions proved how much your family meant to you. My family was everything to me, Andromeda seethed. I loved all of you, even Bellatrix when she ran off and joined that madman. You can't deny it, she made a poor decision. I'm not denying it, Cassiopeia ground out, but we are not discussing your sisters. No, we are talking about me being kicked out because I fell in love with someone. None of you approved of, Andromeda bit back. No one forced you into a contract, so you wouldn't understand. They wouldn't have dared, Cassiopeia bit back. Andromeda shook her head. Not all of us were as strong as you, Cassie. Not all of us could fight the family and live, she sighed. Then you should have done as you were told, girl, Cassiopeia replied evenly, and live a miserable life churning out future Death Eaters and being a prize on someone's arm. I would have rather died, Andromeda declared. Cassiopeia shook her head. None of it matters, you asked me here for a reason, so get to the point, Andromeda, she demanded. Andromeda nodded as she entered the kitchen. Can I get you something to drink? She asked, almost sarcastically. No, thank you, Cassie said dismissively. An uncomfortable silence fell between the two before the older woman sighed. For the love of Merlin, talk, she urged. Andromeda took a deep breath. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Nymphadora, she began, deflating. I know you probably wanted to let her die, but you didn't, and I really am grateful. If there's anything I can do for you, then you just have to say. Cassiopeia bowed, accepting the gratitude as Arcturus would expect from her. I couldn't let her die, she huffed. Regardless of her status, she still shares my blood and Harry would never have forgiven me. No, I doubt he would, Andromeda agreed, surprised by the woman's change in demeanor. He's a ruthless little git, more stubborn than Arcturus and will one day be more dangerous. I pity anyone who gets on the wrong side of him or upsets the ones he care about, she snorted. Andromeda nodded. What is going on between them? Andromeda probed. Her daughter refused to discuss anything in detail, but she had her suspicions. Everything she had seen so far pointed to only one thing. The two bloody idiots are inseparable, Cassie grumbled. I've never seen him like this with anyone. He's a good kid mostly, but always struggled with his emotions. I think I taught him too well and what he went through as a babe didn't help. Sirius explained it to me, Andromeda clarified. Cassie nodded. I've never been so angry and disgusted in my life the night we found him. He was all skin and broken bones. I was certain that he wouldn't make it. She sighed. Do you have a problem with him and Dora spending time together? Andromeda asked. Cassie cackled. There's nothing I could do even if I did. Harry will always do what he wants, no matter what even Arcturus says. He respects the man, but Arcturus knows not to try and push him too much. Harry would sooner lose his title than be forced into things he didn't want to do. He's a damned nightmare. He's a black, Andromeda corrected. You're all stubborn and strong-willed. It will serve him well when he is named Lord. Cassie nodded reluctantly. He will be brilliant. He's a natural at dealing with people. Completely tactless, but that's what we are all about, I suppose, she conceded. I pity anyone that tries to cross wands with the boy. Even in my prime he would have been a handful, and I spent time with Grindelwald. He would have made a damned good apprentice to him. And what about your apprentice? She questioned, not wanting to discuss her aunt's connection to the other Dark Lord. Leo? Cassie returned, surprised. He's got a bright future in whatever he chooses to do. I imagine he'll go back east eventually, she mumbled sadly. You've grown attached to the boy, Andromeda jested. Cassie narrowed her eyes. He reminded me a lot of Harry, she explained, and as he's gotten older he's more like Gellert when I first met him. He's charming, gifted with a wand, and it terrifies me that he could have turned out more like him. Andromeda smiled sadly. She'd always had her suspicions that her aunt had been in love with Grindelwald, and that had been why she chose to remain alone. I've practically raised the boy, Cassie continued. He's given me more grey hairs than anything else, but he's not been so bad, she conceded. And him fighting Lucius? Andromeda pressed. Cassie shook her head. I wish Arcturus would have spoken to me about it, she sighed. I have no doubt that he will win. It doesn't stop me from worrying. I was always the same with Dora, Andromeda huffed. Always getting into trouble, and then she went and joined the Auras. I'm surprised I don't have any greys yet. Cassie smirked. If she sticks around with Harry, I bet they'll come soon. The boy has a tendency to land himself in trouble on a regular basis, she grumbled. Will you let her stick around? Andromeda asked. Cassie shrugged. Harry will do what he wants, and if he wants her around, then that is his choice. I'd love to see someone try and force him into a contract. Since we've been here, he's had 8 offers that he doesn't know about. Arcturus knows better than to mention them, she laughed. But he will have to marry, Andromeda pointed out, when Lord Black retires. Cassie nodded. I think Arcturus will do it sooner than anyone expects. He's an old man now and has earned his rest. He has, Andromeda agreed, her mind wandering to the subject of Harry having to marry. She knew that Dora would not take that well at all. She could only hope the two of them figured out what they were to the other before that happened. The sound of the front door closing pulled her from her thoughts, and her husband entered the kitchen, his eye twitching as he took in the sight of her aunt at the table. Miss Black, he greeted her almost coldly. Cassie's nose wrinkled as though an unpleasant odor had appeared. Theodore, she replied as she stood. I've said my piece, Andromeda, she continued, her tone once again formal. I will take my leave now. Andromeda watched sadly as her aunt exited the house. She never would have thought it, but their conversation had gone better than she expected. The woman had even been cordial. "Are you okay? And I?" Ted asked. Andromeda smiled. "I'm fine," she assured her husband. It was just strange having her here. Ted nodded as he pulled her into his arms. "I can imagine," he sighed. Andromeda exhaled, her thoughts with the woman and the rest of the family she'd been expelled from. She had no regrets about her decision, but it didn't stop her missing them. It had been years since she had seen either of her sisters, and often dwelled on their childhood. No matter how unbearable their father had made it, they'd always had each other. Narcissa Malfoy paced back and forth in one of the many parlor rooms, situated within the manor, her stomach little more than a pit of despair. Not only had she been ousted from her blood family, there was a chance that her husband would be killed on the morrow. What bothered her most was that the man had not sought her counsel and had ignored any request she had sent to see him. She knew that he was plotting and scheming to seize an advantage in the upcoming duel, but she knew there would be none to find. Her grandfather would see to that. Lucius was a good duelist, but she had seen better, and if the boy he was fighting had been educated by the blacks, her husband would stand no chance. "Dobby," she called worriedly. "Mistress calls for Dobby," the elf replied as it appeared, its pillowcase filthy with grime. "Has Lucius arrived home?" she questioned, ignoring the soiled appearance of the creature. "Master has not and tells Dobby he will be out for the evening," the elf informed her. Narcissa scowled and dismissed the elf. She had no doubt that Lucius would be off indulging himself somewhere like the fool he had proven himself to be. She shook her head as she exited the parlor and headed to her rooms. Lucius had insisted she had her own, something she was grateful for. Often, even during the early days of their marriage, he would arrive home drunk, reeking of other women's perfume, and his lips stained. She'd learnt not to care. Their marriage was a political move by both their parents, a match that neither wanted in the long run. At first, Lucius had been keen. He had showered her with gifts and affection. He had even performed his duty on their wedding night, but he had become cold immediately afterwards. He no longer spent time with her in or out of the Dedham, and had never done anything to rectify that part of their relationship. For years she wondered if it was something she had done, but nothing she could think of should have displeased him. It had been around Draco's 8th birthday that he had come home drunk one evening and had told her in his drunken stupor that just wasn't attracted to her. He preferred his women to be more on the plump side, and her lithe body did nothing for him. From then, there'd been a bitterness between the two. She remained the dutiful wife, and he the husband in the public eye. She focused on raising their son and he on the politics, though he had no gift for it. He simply threw money at everything and hoped it would work. She shook her head as she pulled out a few trunks and began filling them with her personal possessions. She had been prepared for this for many years. She had sequestered a sizable sum of gold in a vault of her own under a pseudonym, more than enough to live on for the rest of her days, and had even purchased a house. Lucius paid little attention to what he had in Gringotts, which had worked to her advantage. He had been squandering the family fortune for fears through his lavish spending and bribery, to the point that he had managed to almost half it. Still, it was more than almost any other family had, and she refused to let it all go to waste. If worst came to worst, herself and Draco would still have a home and would live comfortably, though with considerably less opulence than her son was used to. Leo finished with his final checks on his wand, to ensure that, as always, it was in optimum condition and ready to use. He had slept surprisingly well. Combat was the thing he was most familiar with. Put a crying girl in front of him, he was uncomfortable, but a situation that threatened his very existence, he was in his element. During his years of schooling, he had learnt to love conflict down to the sickly bile that coated the throat when it was nigh. He had been taught to love it, the fear, the anticipation, the adrenaline that coursed through his veins. It had been necessary to do so if one were to survive. He stood as a knock sounded at the door and opened it. The blacks along with Tonks entered, a trio of officially dressed men in their wake. "They are here to carry out a search to ensure that you are not carrying anything other than the one wand allowed," Arcturus explained. "They will then test you for potions to make sure you have not taken anything that will give you an advantage." Leo nodded as two of the men began running a secrecy sensor over him, probing his body in every nook and cranny they could reach, whilst the third man removed a trunk and opened it. "I need a sample of blood," he demanded gruffly. "In the vial." The teen cut his finger and watched as it pooled into the container. When the man was satisfied it was enough, he motioned for him to stop before drawing his wand and muttering under his breath. "He's clean," he announced after a few minutes of work. "We will remain with you to ensure it stays that way." Leo shrugged and began stretching. "How are you?" Harry questioned from his position leaning against the wall, his arms folded casually across his chest. "Fine," Leo replied shortly. Harry nodded his acceptance. It was not often that his friend was like this. For the most part, he was relaxed, jovial. Now, however, he could be described as a caged animal, ready to strike the moment he was released. "Don't fuck about today," Arcturus broke in severely. "The future of my family could well depend on this. Get in there and get the job done. Make sure that no other family will mess with yours or mine again." Leo nodded, his nostrils flaring slightly, eyes burning with desire. He had played this out in his mind several times over the past couple of weeks. He wanted to enjoy the moment, to see Lucius Malfoy suffer for what he had done to his family. Then he could work out a way to get the others. Malfoy had seemingly been out of reach, but if even the untouchable could in fact get his, the rest of them could too. He just needed to find a way. "I know," he answered. "I will handle it." Arcturus nodded. Cassie stepped forward and pulled him into a hug, her skin a little more pale than usual, her face lined with worry. "You will be fine," she whispered. Leo snorted as he wrapped his arms around her. "Tell that to yourself, Cass," he returned with a grin. The woman glared at him as she slapped his shoulder and shook her head. "Harry?" he called, turning his attention to the other boy. "If anything goes wrong, look after Rasputin and the lass." Harry looked horrified by the idea of being the primary carer of the creature, and sighed as he nodded. Sirius clapped him on the shoulder and gave him a single nod as he led them towards the door. He opened it and found himself face to face with a very upset Katie, who threw herself at him and sobbed into his chest. Leo caught the girl and looked helplessly towards the others who offered no support. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I had to be here," she replied shakily. "I couldn't just wait at school." Leo sighed and shook his head. "You shouldn't be here for this," he mumbled. "You don't need to see this, lass." "I'm not going anywhere," Katie bit back stubbornly, eliciting a laugh from Cassiopeia. Leo dragged a hand down his face as he looked pleadingly towards Harry. "Fine," he conceded, unhappily, "but you will stay with Harry and Tonks, and you will do exactly what they say." "My parents are here," Katie explained. "So are half of the school with theirs." "Bloody hell," Leo exclaimed. "Fine, Harry and Tonks will take you to them and stay with you," he decided. Both Harry and Tonks nodded. "Please don't do this," Katie whispered in a last-ditch attempt to prevent the duel. "I don't think I can handle it." Leo wrapped his arms tighter around her. "I'll be okay," he assured her, "but I have to do this. You understand?" Katie swallowed deeply and nodded. She understood, but she did not like it. "When this is all over, we can go somewhere, just us two," he added. Katie exhaled and wiped her eyes. "Promise?" Leo smiled. "Aye, I promise. Now, go with Harry and Tonks, and I will see you soon." Katie stared at him a moment longer before allowing herself to be led from the room. "That's the half-blood?" Cassie questioned. "Don't start, Cassie," Sirius warned. "Aye," Leo confirmed. "She's a good lass, a better girl than I deserve." "I have a bad feeling about this, Lucius," Fudge stammered, fidgeting with his hat. Lucius sneered at the man, in no mood for his spineless antics. Truth be told, Lucius was not certain that a duel was the best course of action, but he had no choice. The most concerning thing to him was that his own contacts and himself had been unable to learn very little of the boy. His name held no sway with the ICW, apparently. They had flatly refused to provide him with any details, stating that his education was of no consequence to him. Even Fudge in his loftier position had failed to sway them. A concern indeed, but it meant nothing. Lucius had spent several years under the finest instructors, one of them being the Dark Lord. A teenager was no threat to him. The additional items about his person and already within him were merely extra assurances. If you don't want the power and influence of the Black Fortune to fall into the hands of the Potter boy, we have no choice, Cornelius, Lucius reminded him. Fudge sighed. I cannot help but think that Arcturus Black has gotten us exactly where he wants us, the minister replied uncomfortably. Arcturus Black is an old fool, and his foolishness will cost him dearly, Lucius said confidently. The entirety of his family now lies with a boy. Fudge shook his head. A boy that he hand-picked to represent him, he pointed out. Lucius ignored the shiver that ran down his spine as a loud knock sounded at the door. He frowned as he rose to answer it, having requested that he not be disturbed under any circumstances. He was greeted with the sight of 3 gentlemen, each wearing unfamiliar yet high-quality formal robes. Lord Malfoy, one of them greeted. Lucius nodded, his gaze flitting between the trio. We have been sent by the International Confederation of Warlocks to oversee the event at the request of one of our members. The man continued. One of our representatives is here to referee the duel. We are here to carry out checks to ensure that neither combatant has any undue advantage. You will submit yourself for a search and provide a sample of blood to my colleague here. Lucius seethed internally and felt everything crash around his shoulders. The only person who carried such influence was Dumbledore. It had to be him responsible for them being here. And if I refuse, he questioned through gritted teeth. The man smiled at him sickeningly. Then you will forfeit the duel. As per the agreement, you will pay the fee of 50 million galleons to your opponent, he informed him. Gentlemen, is this really necessary? Cornelius intervened. I can personally vouch for Lord Malfoy's character. Rules are rules, Minister, the man replied with a shrug. Lucius tensed his jaw as Fudge fumbled over his words, it failing to reason with the bureaucrats. Then get on with it, he growled. He winced as the secrecy sensor was prodded into him, the 2 men carrying out the search glaring at him in disapproval as they found his extra wand, a cursed dagger and 2 emergency portkeys. The blood sample, the 3rd man insisted, shoving an empty vial into his hand. With a shake of his head, Lucius opened a shallow cut across his palm and healed it when it was mostly full. The man snatched it from his grasp and went about his working, sighing and shooting him filthy looks as the contents of what he had taken only a short while ago were revealed. Strengthening solution, endurance elixir, vampire essence and powdered werewolf bone, he announced disgustedly. Fudge looked at him in surprise as the man shook his head and withdrew a cauldron along with several jars of ingredients. This is going to take a while, you'd better inform Carlos, he sighed to one of his colleagues, who exited to carry out his instructions. The man returned to his work for the next 20 minutes before spooning a concoction into a goblet and handing it to Lucius. You will drink this and then we will wait for a few minutes and test you again, he explained. Lucius wanted nothing more than to throw it in the man's face. Knowing he had no choice, however, he did as he was bid. Almost immediately he felt the benefits of his own additions fading, and within a minute or so they had all but vanished. Soon after, his tormentor handed him another empty vial that he dutifully filled, cursing the men and their interference internally. Now, he's clean, the Potania announced irritably. We will remain with you until the start of the duel to ensure that something else doesn't accidentally make its way into your system. Lucius sneered as he stalked towards the door and exited. Things were not going according to plan. His only hope was to win the duel on an even footing, though how a 16-year-old could measure up to him he did not know. The crowd booed at the announcement of the duel having to be delayed due to Lucius Malfoy having to be purged of the illegal substances found in his blood sample. Many shouted from his immediate disqualification, but most wanted to see the much-anticipated fight. Harry watched Leo's reaction and snorted as the boy simply sat in the middle of the arena and waited for the arrival of his opponent. Dirty, cheating bastard, Katie hissed furiously. Katie, her mother chastised sharply. Katie glared at her mother whilst her father nodded in agreement with his daughter. It was people like the Lucius Malfoy that had made it difficult finding work in the wizarding world because of his blood status. I didn't expect anything less, Harry muttered. Tonks nodded. Malfoy wouldn't know a fair fight. Shame he has no choice in the matter, she grinned. Harry shook his head, fighting his laughter at the staring match between the mother and daughter only a few feet away. Leave it, Sarah, Katie's father intervened with a smirk. She's understandably emotional. Sarah Bell switched her glare to her husband, who simply chuckled. She was a small woman, not even reaching 5.5 foot, considerably smaller than his larger frame of over 6 feet himself. His daughter took more after him than her mother. Sarah was fair-haired and diminutive with light blue eyes. Katie, though not much taller, had his darker hair, his dark brown eyes, and a not-so-feminine build, mostly because of her Quidditch training. He was very proud of his daughter and had spent her teenage years thus far having no concern about her dating. That, however, changed this very morning when she had arrived with the Weasley twins, almost terrified that the boyfriend he hadn't known of was the one fighting Lucius Malfoy. He shook his head as his wife softened her gaze, mischief now replacing the irritation. "You still have not explained how it is that you met," Sarah pointed out. "How long have you been dating him?" Katie shifted her feet nervously as her parents waited for her to answer. "Since the Yule Ball, I guess," she answered uncertainly. This time, Harry did laugh at her discomfort. It was strange to see the unapologetic girl look guilty. "And you didn't think to tell us?" her mother continued disbelievingly. Katie looked sheepish as her father placed a calming hand on her mother's arm. "She's a sensible girl," he reminded her. "We raised her properly." Sarah Bell sighed and nodded. "I was a sensible girl until I met you, Richard," she returned. The man grinned triumphantly as he nodded, though it turned into a frown. "He hasn't taken advantage of you, has he?" he questioned his daughter. Katie was mortified by the question as Harry guffawed. "Mr. Bell, Leo really is a good guy. I'd be more worried about Katie being a bad influence on him," he quipped. "And what is that supposed to mean, Black?" Robert asked defensively. It was unnerving for the man to be in the presence of a boy of Harry Black's station. His experience with the upper pureblood families had never been great, but he was not going to allow anyone to bring into question the morals of his daughter. Harry held up a placating hand. "I meant nothing of the sort," Harry clarified, undeterred by the man's sudden anger. "I only meant that Leo would never do anything to dishonor your daughter." Robert relaxed as he nodded. "Forgive me, Mr. Black, but I will be the judge of him. Katie is my only daughter, and I will not have her treated with anything other than utmost respect," he insisted. Harry grinned as Katie continued to look at her father in horror. "Well, if all goes well today, I'm sure he would be more than happy to meet you," Harry offered. Robert Bell nodded. "As would I," he replied, his wife bobbing her head in agreement as the crowd erupted into boos at the entrance of Lucius Malfoy. At the sound of the crowd, Leo stood and watched as Malfoy swaggered towards him, his cockiness causing a grin to form on his own face. His was not one of amusement, but a feral one, a manifestation of the desire to harm the man strutting across the ground between them. "Gentlemen," the referee addressed them as they stood a few feet apart, "the duel will be conducted under ICW rules. All spells in your arsenal are legal, but you will heed my commands. If I call a break, you will cease immediately. If I call an end to the duel, you will stop, and finally, if your opponent verbally submits, you will sheath your wand. Any questions?" Leo shook his head, his eyes firmly on his opponent as Malfoy followed suit. "Then shake hands, and may the best man win," the referee instructed. Leo shook his head and turned before stepping away. He was not here for sportsmanship, and he certainly had no wish to touch the man in any way. The hissing of the crowd drew his attention, and he hissed as his back erupted in agony, the skin seared by the curse that had hit him. Had it been a killing curse, the duel would be over. Lucius would regret not seizing the opportunity to its full potential. Chiding himself, he ignored the pain as avoided another spell, and sent one of his own. The ground between the two combatants split, and a tidal wave of dirt plowed towards Malfoy. A distraction more than anything, but one that gave Leo time to act. He could tear the man apart with magic and put on quite the show doing so. He, however, wanted the man to suffer with pain and humiliation, and he knew the perfect way to do that. "Humanum revelio," he muttered as he charged forward, closing the gap between the two of them. A thick cloud of dust separated them, but the spell worked as intended. Lucius was only half a dozen feet away, cursing as he tried to remove the obstruction. Leo aimed a widespread silencing charm and threw an uppercut with his right hand just after it landed, the sickening crunch of a breaking bone, the most satisfying sound he had ever heard. Lucius hit the ground with a dull thud, groaning as his mouth filled with the taste of iron. He managed to roll to his front and spit as he groped blindly for his wand, not realizing that he had dropped it. Panicking, he did not see the irate teen falling upon him. He winced as a fist impacted against his kidney and hissed, though no sound escaped him as the next blow smashed into his ribs. In desperation, he kicked out with both legs and got a reprieve for his efforts. Again, he resumed his search for his wand, knowing that he could not hope to win in a muggle fight. The thought of being struck in such a way made him furious. The fury gave way to relief as his hand closed on a familiar slither of wood, and he continued to crawl aimlessly, hoping to escape the dust he was trapped within, aware that the boy was still stalking him somewhere. His first breath of fresh air was a welcome feeling as he reached the edge of the ground and used the wooden fence to pull himself to his feet, grimacing at the ache in his nose and ribs. He decided to let the boy tire himself by searching for him. He was in no hurry to give away the fact that he was no longer inside the swirling debris. His rest ended much sooner than he was ready as the movement of the dirt slowed before it compacted together and turned into a giant spear. His eyes widened as the construct careened towards him and dived to the floor to avoid the impact. The fence behind him exploded, and it was a miracle that he was not skewered by any of the splinters. Thankfully, the boy was not close enough to truly seize the advantage, and Lucius gingerly got to his feet, ready to go on the offensive. He had never been great at defense, but his skill with darker magic had always served him well. He took aim and unleashed a flurry of spells, only to see them batted aside, the smirk of amusement the boy wore angering him further. "Avada Kedavra," he screamed, ignoring the myriad of screams and booing from the crowd. Leo hastily conjured a large slab of marble that exploded under the force of the curse, the chips cutting into the skin on his face and hands he'd used to cover his eyes. Apparently, his silencing charm had worn off. During the momentary distraction, he felt a sense of easiness wash over him, his head lighter than it should be, and the desire to obey very strong. "Lower your wand and hand it to me," the voice of Malfoy sounded in his mind. He truly had to fight the urge to obey completely. He had been placed under the Imperious curse numerous times, but this was stronger than any he had faced. Grudgingly, he had to admit that Lucius had a gift for it. Compliantly, he lowered his wand and began walking towards the smugly grinning man, battling against the tight hold the man held over him. It was difficult, and had he not studied so diligently under Aunt Cassie, he had little faith that he could take back control. "Good. Now hand it to me," Lucius demanded when he was only a few short feet away. By now, Leo had had enough time to compose himself, though not enough to disobey completely. However, instead of handing his wand to the man, he threw it in the air, and Lucius's eyes followed it as it arched towards him, to his own detriment. As he released the wand, Malfoy lost enough concentration for him to wrest back the final vestiges of his self-control, and he sprang into action. With practiced ease, he aimed a powerful kick between the other man's legs, elevating him a few feet before he yelped and collapsed to the ground in a heap. Leo immediately fell upon him and began raining blow after blow with his fists, eventually seizing him by the throat and driving his head forcefully into the already smashed nose. Lucius feebly attempted to aim his wand, only for it to be ripped from his hand as the grip around his neck tightened, the ability to draw breath now eliminated. His bulging eyes searched desperately for the referee to draw an end to the contest, but the man looked on almost carelessly as his head began to swim. "This is for my parents," Leo whispered as he pushed his knee into Malfoy's sternum, driving the last of the wind from his body. Lucius grabbed at the boy's forearm and struck at it a few times to no avail. The last thing he saw as darkness overcame him was the grimly determined face of the boy choking the life out of him, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with tears. Leo was unrelenting as ever, even when he felt the man go limp under him. Angrily, he wrapped the other hand around the neck and squeezed even more. The man had not suffered enough for what he had done to his parents and countless other people. He willed him to draw breath once more, so that he could again revel in the satisfaction of taking it away. He was not aware of the referee calling for him to stop, nor the man attempting to pull him away. The only thing he noticed was a flash of red before he too fell into the darkness, though he took satisfaction knowing that his would not be as permanent as the one that had befallen Lucius Malfoy.